Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ryan Poston. Ryan Poston was born on December 30th, 1982 in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, to Lisa and Jay Poston. He had a strong and loving bond with his three sisters, Allison, Catherine, and Elizabeth, throughout his life. Growing up, Ryan had the opportunity to travel extensively and attend schools in Switzerland and the Philippines. This exposure broadened his horizons and gave him an adventurous spirit. Ryan was also known for his striking good looks, which, coupled with his charismatic personality, made him stand out in a crowd. After graduating from high school, Ryan attended Indiana University, where he earned a degree in political science, history, and geography. He excelled academically and graduated with honors in 2005. Following in the footsteps of his family members, Ryan pursued a career in law. He enrolled in the Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University, driven by his admiration for the legal profession. His esteemed grandfather and uncle, both practicing attorneys, were his role models. Ryan's ultimate goal was to own a successful law firm. While in Cincinnati, Ohio, Ryan dedicated himself to helping people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers. Despite being young, he had already built a strong reputation, and many sought his advice. He worked hard to ensure everyone had access to fair and competent legal representation, regardless of their financial situation. After a painful breakup in 2011, Ryan turned to his cousin Carissa for comfort and support. During a visit to Lexington, Kentucky to spend time with her, he met Shayna Hubers, a Lexington native, and his life took an unexpected turn. Shayna Hubers embodied the quintessential Southern girl, renowned for her outgoing personality and effortless ability to form friendships. Her warm and charming demeanor naturally drew people to her. After graduating high school in 2009 with a full scholarship, she continued her education at the University of Kentucky, majoring in psychology, before pursuing her master's degree in psychology at Eastern Kentucky University. Despite their 8-year age gap, Ryan was 29, while Shayna was just 21. Their feelings for each other grew increasingly undeniable. With each visit Ryan made to see his cousin Carissa in Lexington, he found himself devoting more time to Shayna. As they spent more time together, their bond deepened. Shayna began spending more time in Highland Heights, the Kentucky suburb where Ryan lived. Every weekend, she would pack a bag and visit Ryan's home, dedicating herself to taking care of him, cooking his meals, and cleaning his living space. As time went on, Ryan and Shayna's relationship grew stronger, and he took her to meet his parents. She was over the moon with excitement, telling her friends all about Ryan and even saying she wanted to become Mrs. Ryan Poston. But their promising future came to a tragic end on October 12, 2012. In a panicked call to the police, Shayna admitted to fatally shooting her boyfriend, Ryan. The details she shared revealed a devastating scene of domestic violence that had spun out of control. According to Shayna, Ryan had tried to physically abuse her, dragging her out of the house when she attempted to gather her belongings. She told the 911 dispatcher that Ryan had confronted her with a gun, leading to a physical fight. In the heat of the moment, Shayna managed to grab the gun, but she was intimidated by Ryan's size. In a state of panic, she pulled the trigger, ultimately shooting Ryan. Shayna admitted that she believed Ryan's death was inevitable, so she claimed she wanted to end his suffering. She told the 911 dispatcher that Ryan was in distress, making unusual sounds, which motivated her to shoot him several more times. Afterwards, she revealed that she left the gun on a bookshelf. Minutes after Shayna called 911 to report that she had shot her boyfriend, officers were sent to the scene. When they arrived, they told Shayna to come out of the apartment with her hands up. At first, she was hesitant, but she eventually followed their orders. As she walked out, they told her to lie face down on the ground. It was clear that Shayna was very upset as she complied with their instructions. After the officers handcuffed Shayna and put her in the back of their patrol car, they entered the apartment and found Ryan Poston's body on the dining room floor, covered in blood. Crime scene investigators arrived and examined Ryan's condo, which looked a bit messy, but nothing out of the ordinary for a 29-year-old man. They found that Ryan had a concealed carry permit and owned weapons, including the Sig Sauer semi-automatic gun that Shayna used to shoot him. Based on the evidence they gathered, the investigators concluded that Ryan was sitting at the table when Shayna opened fire. They knew this because of the blood found on the table. However, the fact that several items on the dining room table were not disturbed raised doubts about Shayna's story. If there had been a fight, the items would have been disturbed. The crime scene investigators thoroughly searched Ryan's apartment, gathering every detail. At the same time, police officers questioned Ryan's neighbors to see if they had any information that could help the case. One of Ryan's neighbors, a woman named Nikki, spoke to the detective and provided some useful insights. Nikki knew Shayna well and thought that Shayna was more committed to Ryan than he was to her. According to Nikki, the couple often had loud, angry arguments that disturbed the neighborhood. Nikki remembered a specific incident several months ago when Shayna came to her door in tears, saying she was afraid of Ryan. Shayna had told Nikki that she and Ryan had a violent fight, during which he lifted her up and threw her down the hallway, causing her injuries. Nikki believed Shayna and encouraged her to report the abuse to the police, but Shayna decided not to take legal action. At the police station, detectives took Shayna to an interrogation room to question her about the shooting of her boyfriend, Ryan. Before starting the interview, the officers read Shayna her Miranda rights, reminding her that she had the right to have an attorney present. Shayna chose to exercise this right and asked for a lawyer to be present. While waiting in the interrogation room, Shayna filled out some paperwork under the supervision of a detective. Despite having asked for a lawyer, Shayna still chatted with the detective. When asked who the victim was, Shayna calmly replied that it was the man she had killed. This response showed a clear lack of emotion, as it was obvious she knew the victim was Ryan, her long-term boyfriend. Shayna remained in the interrogation room with the detectives, maintaining that she had acted in self-defense. She recounted the events of the previous night, describing how Ryan had allegedly grabbed her by the throat and violently thrown her around the apartment. At some point during the investigation, the detective temporarily left the room, replaced by another officer. Shayna began to reveal more details about her encounter with Ryan to this new officer. She alleged that Ryan had been extremely aggressive prior to the shooting, hurling insults at her, calling her crazy, and taunting her while brandishing a gun. Shayna believed that Ryan's behavior that night was fueled by drug use, which contributed to his violent outbursts. Throughout the interview, Shayna consistently stuck to her version of the events that culminated in the shooting. She claimed that Ryan was sitting at the dining room table, handling ammunition for his Sig Sauer pistol, when she noticed him staring aggressively at her from across the table. At that moment, she became aware of his intentions and realized he was trying to evict her from his condo. Shayna confessed to picking up the gun and firing it in the midst of the chaos, hitting Ryan with a single bullet. Shayna continued to describe the incident, claiming that after shooting Ryan once, she saw him twitching. Believing it was necessary to end his suffering, she fired multiple shots, ultimately killing him. In her confession, Shayna told the detective that Ryan was vain and had mentioned wanting a nose job, so she decided to grant him his wish. She deliberately aimed her gun at his face and pulled the trigger, essentially giving him the rhinoplasty he had requested. During the intense interrogation, Shayna expressed deep concerns about the impact of the incident on her academic performance and her future romantic relationships. She confided in the detective that having a dead boyfriend would make it difficult for her to find someone to marry, especially if they discovered she had killed him in self-defense. Despite her statement, the detective arrested and charged her with Ryan's murder. Shayna seemed genuinely surprised by her arrest, maintaining that she had acted in self-defense. In 2015, Shayna's trial began, and the courtroom was filled with anticipation. The prosecutor compared Shayna to Jodi Arias, who had also been charged with murdering her boyfriend, Travis Alexander, emphasizing the striking similarities between the two cases. This heightened the tension in the courtroom as everyone awaited the outcome. The prosecutor argued that Shayna was fixated on her ex-boyfriend, Ryan. According to the prosecution, Ryan dominated Shayna's thoughts, and she constantly discussed him. During the trial, the prosecutor presented testimony from Ryan's friends, who described his plans to end the relationship with Shayna and his efforts to avoid her phone calls and messages. Despite this, Shayna continued to visit Ryan's condo in Highland Heights uninvited, including on the night of the murder. The prosecution introduced evidence that Ryan had scheduled a date with Audrey Bolt, a former Miss Ohio, on the night of the murder. This information supported the prosecution's theory that Shayna was driven by jealousy and anger towards Ryan's potential new love interest. Audrey Bolt testified that she was supposed to meet Ryan for drinks at a bar on the night of the murder, but he failed to appear. It wasn't until later that she learned of his murder. The prosecution also presented evidence that Ryan had repeatedly expressed his desire to end the relationship with Shayna in the days leading up to his death. Ryan had sought advice from his father, Jay, on how to handle the situation, and Jay had counseled him to be kind to Shayna to avoid a messy breakup. However, it appears that Shayna continued to exert control over Ryan on the day he was killed. The prosecution presented evidence of several text exchanges between Ryan and Shayna, in which Ryan clearly told her he did not want to see her that weekend because he had other commitments. Nevertheless, Shayna showed up uninvited at his condo, which was not unusual for her. The argument that ensued reached a boiling point when Ryan explicitly told Shayna their relationship was over and she could no longer control him. Prosecutors argued that this statement enraged Shayna, prompting her to pick up a gun and fatally shoot Ryan. During Shayna's trial for murdering Ryan, the prosecution showed a video of her being questioned by the police to suggest she was a cold-blooded killer. In the video, Shayna's calm behavior and responses seemed to back up the idea that she had intentionally taken Ryan's life. The footage showed her dancing and singing along to music, which seemed unusual for someone who had just killed their loved one in self-defense. Normally, people in such a situation would be distraught and crying due to the loss of life and the weight of their actions. The prosecution's goal in showing the video was to make Shayna appear detached and unemotional, implying that her actions were not those of someone who had acted in self-defense. They claimed that her lack of tears and carefree behavior proved her guilt. However, this interpretation was open to debate and up to the jury to decide. In the end, the video was a key piece of evidence in the prosecution's case against Shayna, but it was just one part of the evidence presented during the trial. Shayna's defense team stuck to a clear storyline throughout her trial, arguing that Ryan was the aggressive and violent one on the night of the incident, leading Shayna to shoot him. To back up this claim, they built a picture of Ryan's mental state, suggesting that a mix of drugs he was taking, including anti-anxiety medications and amphetamines, contributed significantly to his behavior. The defense team presented the jury with autopsy results showing the presence of these drugs in Ryan's system, strengthening their argument that the drugs influenced his actions. An expert toxicologist testified for Shayna, stating that a combination of drugs like anti-anxiety medications and amphetamines could cause someone to become violent and paranoid. This testimony aimed to provide a reasonable explanation for Shayna's actions, implying that she may not have intended to harm Ryan. During Shayna's trial in April 2015, the prosecution grew increasingly worried that she might be acquitted due to being a smart, young, and attractive woman, and that her self-defense claim might persuade the jury. However, on April 23rd, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, convicting Shayna of murdering her boyfriend, Ryan Poston. At the August 2015 sentencing hearing, Shayna persisted in shifting the blame for Ryan's death onto him, which infuriated his friends and family. Despite the overwhelming evidence presented during the trial, Shayna stuck to her claim of innocence and refused to acknowledge her role in the events. Under Kentucky law, a defendant who is deemed a victim of domestic violence can be eligible for early parole after serving just 20% of their sentence. However, the judge in this case ruled that Shayna did not meet the criteria, characterizing her crime as a premeditated murder. As a result, the judge handed down a 40-year prison sentence, making Shayna eligible for parole in 17 years, when she will be 41 years old in 2032. Shayna Hubers was sentenced, but she appealed for a new trial, which was granted by a judge in August 2016. The reason for the appeal was that one of the jurors had failed to disclose their felony conviction, which is against Kentucky law since felons are not allowed to serve on juries. Following a 4-month delay, Shayna's second trial for the murder of Ryan Poston began in August 2018. During the opening arguments, Shayna's defense attorney claimed that throughout her year-and-a-half-long relationship with Ryan, Shayna tried her best to make him happy. However, their romance suffered because of it. The attorney stated that on the very first night Shayna and Ryan met, he was violent toward her, both physically and sexually. This incident had a lasting effect on her, and it took her several weeks to respond to his messages after that. Shayna's defense lawyers claimed that her high school experience of sexual assault led to a history of alcohol abuse and promiscuity. They argued that this traumatic event contributed to her behavior on the night of the murder. The defense team aimed to create a sympathetic image of Shayna, highlighting her troubled past and arguing that she was not responsible for her actions on the night of the murder. They sought to challenge the prosecution's narrative, suggesting that her behavior was the result of a combination of factors, including a history of abuse and a toxic relationship with Ryan. The defense portrayed Shayna as a victim of domestic violence at Ryan's hands, rather than as a cold-blooded murderer. They claimed that her actions were driven not by a desire for revenge or financial gain, but by years of abuse by her former partner. According to the defense, Ryan constantly criticized Shayna about her weight and chest size, pressuring her to enlarge her breasts. This constant pressure contributed to her low self-esteem and feelings of inadequacy, the defense argued. The defense claimed that Ryan and Shayna's sexual relationship was troubled, marked by frequent disagreements and frustration from both parties. According to the defense, Ryan yearned for a more romantic and intimate connection, but this desire was not fulfilled, leading to a growing rift between them. To support this claim, the defense presented evidence that Shayna had sought an injection to improve her romantic life, which was meant to address the couple's sexual difficulties and strengthen their bond. However, the defense argued that Ryan's consistent rejection and disinterest worsened the strain on their relationship, causing Shayna to become increasingly frustrated and isolated. Moreover, the defense alleged that Ryan often broke up with Shayna, only to engage in conversations with other women. In contrast, the prosecution stated that while Ryan Poston was not a perfect boyfriend, he was not abusive. They argued that Shayna did not act in self-defense when she fatally shot Ryan, but rather because he had ended their relationship that night. The prosecution claimed that it was time for Ryan to break up with Shayna, as she refused to leave him alone despite the breakup, demonstrating her inability to move on from the relationship. One of Ryan's co-workers testified that the breakup between Ryan and Shayna would be permanent this time because Ryan had always avoided breaking up with Shayna in person. According to the co-worker, Shayna had made every effort to keep Ryan. The prosecution presented text messages in which Shayna told her friends that she and Ryan's romantic encounters had brought them closer together. However, Shayna testified that these encounters had actually driven them apart. In another text message exchange, Shayna asked Ryan for sex, but Ryan was taking antidepressants, which had reduced his sex drive due to the medication's side effects. However, when Shayna testified, she claimed that Ryan had forced her into sexual intercourse. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Shayna guilty of murdering Ryan despite contradictory testimonies and conflicting evidence. During the sentencing hearing, Shayna's mother emotionally addressed the judge, sharing stories of her daughter's singing talent, which had earned her multiple college scholarships. Through tears, she begged the jury to consider granting Shayna parole, arguing that her daughter still had the potential to positively impact people's lives. The mother acknowledged, however, that her pleas did not minimize the grief and pain experienced by Ryan Poston's family. Shayna was given a life sentence with no chance of parole. As part of her sentence, she must serve at least 17 years before becoming eligible for parole in 2032. She is currently serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institute for Women in Pewee Valley, Kentucky. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Young. Jason Young comes from Brevard, North Carolina, where he was born in 1974. He grew up in an ordinary family. After graduating from high school, he became a student at the prestigious state university in the capital of his native state, the city of Raleigh. And after graduating, got a job as a salesman in a large retail chain. At work, Jason Young proved himself to be a valuable and promising employee who could always be relied on. But friends spoke of him as a man who was windy and fickle in relations with the opposite sex. He was fickle and often changed women, for which he got a reputation as a womanizer, which, however, he himself was even proud of. Michelle Marie Fisher was born in New York in February 1977. She was raised with her younger sibling Meredith, with whom they were very close from childhood. Their mother, Linda, spent a lot of time with her adored daughters, tried to support them in everything, and contributed to the development of their abilities and talents. Since her school years, Michelle was fond of law and economics, dreaming of linking her life with this very activity. After graduating from school, she applied to several universities at once, and soon received a positive answer from the capital of North Carolina. The girl diligently studied at the Faculty of Economics and Law, receiving a master's degree in this field. After receiving her diploma, Michelle was hired for a high position in one of the leading accounting firms in the state. Yesterday's student was earning well, fully supporting herself and making big plans for the future. She decided to celebrate her 24th birthday at one of the most popular entertainment venues in the city with her close friends and colleagues. They were heartily enjoying themselves when some stranger awkwardly turned around and knocked a glass with a cocktail out of the birthday girl's hands. The guy immediately started apologizing and, to make amends, bought Michelle another cocktail. That young man was Jason Young, and the pretty young Michelle immediately caught his eye. He sat down at her table and started a casual conversation, joked a lot, tried to be witty and interesting, and at the end of the evening asked her out on a date. Michelle also liked the casual acquaintance, so she willingly accepted his invitation, deciding that it was fate itself made her a gift on her birthday. The couple began to communicate, and soon they realized that they had a lot in common. They both studied at the same university. Although Jason got his degree 3 years earlier, supported the same hockey team, and were fans of the same music group. Between young people quickly began a romantic relationship. But to live together, let alone get married, was out of the question at the start of his relationship with Michelle. Jason was still living at his parents' house in Brevard, and he would only visit his girlfriend in Raleigh on weekends or meet with her during work trips to the state capital. During one of these meetings, his sweetheart informed him that she was pregnant. This news was a real shock for both of them because neither of them was ready for the birth of a child. They were focused on their careers, confidently climbing the ladder, and did not plan to start a family yet. Jason said so at once, but after some hesitation, Michelle decided that she would not have an abortion and would keep the baby. Jason took about a month to rethink the situation, after which he moved to Raleigh to be near his pregnant girlfriend. After a few more months, the couple officially legalized their relationship, not out of love or pregnancy, but due to Michelle's lack of health insurance. Childbirth would have cost the couple a considerable amount of money, but marriage gave them the opportunity to avoid such expenses. The couple's daughter, Young, was born in the spring of 2004. She was given the name Cassidy Elizabeth. The newly married mother went headlong into domestic life and family chores, and her mother and younger sister helped her with this. It should be noted that Michelle's family coolly accepted her chosen one. They were wary of Jason, but tried to avoid conflicts. In the same year, they with a child moved to their own large house located in a quiet and landscaped area of the city. Mother Linda, who came to visit her daughter and granddaughter and help with the household, was the first to notice that there was a certain tense atmosphere in this family. Son-in-law Jason was too emotional and could potentially cause a strain right on the spot. But Michelle made every effort to resolve all the argumentative. In public, she behaved like the happiest wife and mother. Only Mother Linda could honestly describe what was truly occurring. An ominous omen occurred when Cassidy was barely 2 years old. Michelle became pregnant again, and she broke the news to her spouse, but he reacted calmly and seemed even happy about it. Soon, the family traveled by car to Brevard to personally inform Jason's parents of the happy news. They came to visit only for the weekend, and on the first day, they celebrated the upcoming addition to their circle of relatives. The next day, leaving their young daughter with her grandparents for a couple of hours, the couple went to a restaurant to celebrate the event together. As the couple was driving home, Jason, who was at the wheel, excessive steering, and the car went off the road and into a ravine. The couple were shaken but sustained only a few abrasions and bruises, and their lives were not in danger. However, Michelle had a miscarriage. Jason, on the other hand, took the news surprisingly calmly. The accident, the loss of a child, and some strange indifference of the husband, all this looked very suspicious. Later, Linda Fisher would call that accident a bad omen that no one paid proper attention to at the time. They had a mutual friend named Michelle Manny, whom they had known since their days at the same university. For some time, they did not see each other, but in the spring of 2006, shortly before the accident, Jason, during a work trip, accidentally met an old acquaintance. He told his wife about it, and together they decided to invite Manny to visit him. The young woman willingly accepted the invitation, but during her visit, she began to complain about her unhappy family life and problems in her relationship with her husband. At the same time, she constantly praised Jason and told his wife how lucky she was. Jason had frequently flirted with various women in the past, but this particular relationship quickly evolved beyond mere flirtation and friendly support. Jason Young and Michelle Manny started calling each other almost daily and secretly meeting up. Jason consistently explained his absences as being due to business trips, and his wife remained unaware of the truth. In the summer of 2006, Michelle informed her husband that she was pregnant again, but this time Jason was not happy at all. The wife did not understand what was happening. She felt that the beloved was away from her, but believed that this was due to the miscarriage that occurred a few months ago. Jason himself all this time was thinking hard about how to get rid of marital bonds with the least loss to himself. In early November, when Michelle was 5 months pregnant, her husband had another business trip. He traveled 300 miles away from home in his own car, but had booked a hotel room about halfway through the trip. That evening, a pregnant Michelle had a long conversation with her best friend on the phone, telling her about problems in the family and mentioning that she had had a big fight with her husband the night before he left. After the conversation, she went upstairs, put her daughter to bed and fell asleep next to her. About 10 in the evening, Jason reached the hotel and, as he claimed to be tired from the road, went straight to bed. In reality, he was scrutinizing all the entrances, exits, and the location of the security cameras, planning how to leave the hotel and then return undetected, preparing an ironclad alibi for what he thought would be the perfect crime. In the early morning hours, Jason called his wife's sister to ask for help. He said he wanted to give his wife a piece of jewelry for their wedding anniversary, but he had accidentally sent a page from an online store to the home fax machine. He worried that Michelle would see his gift and there would be no surprise. Meredith, though she disliked her son-in-law, still agreed to help him. The police chiefs of Wake County received a 911 call at 1:30 p.m. from 5108 Birchleaf Drive, the Enchanted Oaks area, after Meredith Fisher found her sister Michelle lying face down in a pool of blood in her bedroom. Fisher told the 911 dispatcher that she thinks her sister is dead. It looks like there are bloody footprints all over the house, like the little footprints of Michelle's daughter. Michelle Young died from severe injuries, having been struck in the head at least 10 times during a struggle. When Meredith arrived at her sister's house, she entered through a secret door in the garage that only family members knew about, and that was always unlocked. The house was suspiciously quiet, although the landlady's papers, keys, and wallet were in the hallway, indicating that she hadn't gone anywhere. When she went upstairs, Meredith saw that the bedroom door was wide open, but neither her sister nor her niece answered her call. When she walked into the room, she was met with a horrifying sight. Michelle lay on the floor next to the bed with a fractured skull, in a pool of her own blood. Blood was everywhere. On the walls, the furniture, and bloody child-sized footprints were visible next to the body. Sadly, there was nothing that could be done for the pregnant woman, as she had been dead for hours. Her sister quickly called for emergency assistance. Suddenly, she heard rustling under the bed, looked there, and saw little Cassidy, who looked at her incomprehensibly. Cassidy was not hurt, but she was frightened. The girl saw her mother's death and afterwards spent many hours by her body, as evidenced by the marks on the floor as well as the toys she brought to her mother. Later, forensic experts found a huge number of bruises, abrasions, and fractures on the body of the deceased, which spoke of a long and brutal beating. Michelle's teeth were knocked out, and her skull was fractured with a blunt, heavy object. Later, this instrument of crime was never found. A bloody pillow was lying next to the body, and the marks indicated that the victim had been smothered with it. Nothing was stolen from the house, which means that the night visitor had only one goal: murder. In addition, the locks had not been broken, and there were no signs of forced entry, indicating that the perpetrator had a key or knew about the secret door, which again was known only to family members. In such cases, the main suspect is typically the spouse of the deceased, but in this instance, the individual had an apparently flawless alibi. He asserted that he checked into his hotel room and did not depart until the following morning, when he attended a scheduled business meeting. A review of the records confirmed that Jason had used his room keycard in the evening to enter and in the morning to exit. However, a thorough investigation subsequently uncovered a multitude of irregularities and contradictions. For example, a hotel employee discovered early in the morning that the emergency exit was not only open, but also propped up with a cobblestone to prevent the door from slamming shut. When the investigation decided to check the surveillance camera pointed at that door to find out who had done it, it turned out that this very same camera had been deliberately disabled on the night of the crime. Moreover, it stopped recording about half an hour after Jason checked into his room. The weirdness didn't end there. It turned out that during the night, a man who looked like Jason was getting gas at a station between the hotel and the crime scene, but during the night, he was asked to provide identification as per the rules. He refused to do so, paid cash, and without waiting, quickly left the gas station. The attendant at the inquest identified Jason Young, but the man continued to deny everything, insisting that he had slept in his hotel room during the night. Another oddity was that on the day before the tragedy, Jason called Michelle more than 24 times, and closer to morning, he called his mistress 5 more times, with each conversation lasting no more than 15 seconds. This suggests that Jason was probably panicking, and all of these calls were made outside the hotel, where he, in his own words, had been all night. He was also late for a scheduled business meeting with his partners and looked somewhat confused. However, none of this evidence, either individually or all of them together, proved that Jason had indeed massacred his pregnant wife. Years of investigation and a long-awaited verdict. For almost 3 years, Jason lived the life he'd always lived. Moreover, he achieved custody of his young daughter, which was a serious blow to the relatives of his dead wife. By that time, he stopped hiding his relationship with Manny, who was once friends with the murdered Michelle, which only increased suspicion that it was Jason who committed this brutal crime. Jason was arrested only at the end of 2009, but then, despite the large amount of evidence to prove his guilt, the case failed because the jury did not come to a consensus. However, the case was reopened in 2012 when more evidence was collected, and the testimony of witnesses who saw Jason Young that night outside the hotel in different places, in particular, his rather conspicuous white car, was seen parked on the night of the murder, not far from his own house in an unlit lot, was also included in the case. Also included in the case was the testimony of a child psychologist who told of little Cassidy's strange doll play, during which the girl showed how her daddy spanked her mom, and then she would not get up off the floor. Monty took the stand as a witness in court. She confessed that Jason had cheated on his wife with her, but justified it by saying that he was deeply unhappy in his family life, as he told everyone. Another former mistress of the defendant admitted that she was afraid of his outbursts of anger when he lost control and could hit her. After a long trial, Jason Young was finally found guilty of brutally assaulting his pregnant wife. For this crime, he was sent to prison for life with no right to ever be released. In 2014, convicted Jason filed his first appeal, but it was denied. In 2018, he again asked for a review of his case, but a panel of the State Court of Appeals again denied it. Cassidy was virtually orphaned. Her mother was murdered and her father went to prison for the crime. The girl is being raised by her aunt and maternal grandparents. On November 9, 2006, the body of Michelle Young was laid to rest. This marked the end of a chapter in her life. Michelle Young's death caused a lot of commotion and uproar in the community, as the reasons and circumstances leading to her death. Both locals and strangers felt saddened and outraged that a precious life had departed so suddenly. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Edwin Arrieta Arteaga. The beautiful party island of Koh Phangan, Thailand, is known for its famous full moon beach parties that attract thousands of tourists each month. However, in 2023, it caught people's attention for a completely different and sinister crime that took place on August 3, 2023. Around 6 a.m. that morning, the tranquility was shattered by a heart-wrenching scream. A garbage collector at the Koh Phangan Waste Center had made a horrifying discovery: human remains in a bag. Shaken, she alerted her manager. What initially appeared to be discarded meat turned out to be a human hip. The manager promptly contacted the police, and within the hour, a swarm of police and media descended upon the site. The discovered remains included hips, forearms, legs, intestines, and male private parts, all left in the Koh Phangan garbage dump. Upon initial examination, it was concluded that the man had died within the past 48 hours, as confirmed by the onset of rigor mortis. Furthermore, the extent of decomposition suggested the early stages, where the body appears relatively intact but shows early signs of decay. The remains were identified as those of a Caucasian man, leading the police to believe he was likely a tourist attending the island's famous full moon parties. Finding a dead foreigner in a city and country so heavily relying on tourism is bad press, and they wanted to determine what caused this and solve the crime immediately. They wondered if they could locate the area or location this particular garbage came from that morning. The manager of the dumping site informed them that every morning, garbage from the entire Kofangan came to the site. This was a dead end, the final stop. Facing a dead end, but undeterred, the police waited for forensic analysis and a DNA profile to establish who this person might be. They also scrutinized missing persons reports that might point them in the right direction to solving this mystery. The next day at the same landfill, a plastic bag containing a bloody t-shirt, shorts, underpants, and a receipt from a supermarket called Big C was found. On the same day, their unexpected break occurred when a foreign tourist walked into the island's police station to report his friend missing. He mentioned that his friend, Edwin Arrieta, a 44-year-old Colombian national and plastic surgeon, had been out of contact for a few days. The officers, aware of the ongoing investigation, exchanged glances as if they knew what the other was thinking. Was it just a coincidence, or did the body parts found at the dump belong to this missing person? As the man providing information on the missing persons report identified himself, it became clear that this was no ordinary case. Daniel Sancho Broncalo, a 29-year-old YouTube celebrity chef and the son of two popular Spanish actors, was the one standing before them. Daniel had arrived on the island a few days earlier on July 31, 2023, for the full moon party. He said he last saw his friend Edwin on the evening of August 3rd. From this account, police were treating Edwin's disappearance as a separate missing persons incident. The body parts they discovered yesterday were on the morning of August 3rd, whereas Daniel's report said he last saw his friend that evening. Police asked Daniel to recount his activities on the island, which he gladly did. After arriving on July 31st, he rented a motorcycle and went to the Panviman Hotel. Edwin had already reserved a room for them using his credit card. 2 days later, on August 2nd, Edwin arrived, and Daniel picked him up around 3 p.m. and took him to the hotel. That evening, they went to the beach together, but Daniel lost sight of Edwin and hasn't seen him since. Daniel explained that he was reporting Edwin's disappearance because he was unable to contact him, despite leaving messages and a voicemail. Additionally, Edwin's sister contacted him to ask him to report this to the police. During questioning, the police observed suspicious scratch marks on Daniel's arms and found it odd that he took so long to report his friend missing, considering his behavior. They reviewed CCTV footage along his route. Daniel did arrive on July 31st, rented a motorcycle, and checked into the Panviman Hotel. Both the rental and hotel were paid for using Edwin's credit card. Remember the receipt found at the dump with the bloody clothes mentioned earlier? These were coincidentally discovered on the same day Daniel came in to report a missing person. The detectives found something very strange when examining the CCTV footage at the Big C supermarket from when the purchases were made on August 1st, 2023, the day before Edwin arrived. Daniel was seen buying bleach, cleaning agents, cutting tools, and garbage bags. They didn't disclose this information to Daniel right away and keep this ace up their sleeves for later. On August 2nd, CCTV footage captures Edwin waiting for Daniel. Daniel picks him up from the pier, and with Edwin sitting behind him, Daniel is seen riding the motorbike, presumably heading to the hotel. However, instead of taking Edwin to the hotel, Daniel appears to head in a different direction towards a villa 28 kilometers away from Edwin's intended hotel, called Ahat Salad Resort. The clothes Edwin was wearing while sitting behind Daniel on the motorcycle were found on August 4th at a garbage dump, further suggesting Daniel knew more than he admitted. Edwin was never seen alive again. Edwin Arrieta was a successful Colombian plastic surgeon. According to his friends, his career was incredibly important to him, and he frequently traveled to places like London and Buenos Aires. He loved horse riding and a variety of sports. Edwin was a devoted son and brother and took pride in taking care of his parents and sister. In fact, it was his sister, Darling Arrieta, who first raised the alarm when Edwin stopped responding to her messages on August 2nd. Worried, she started calling some of his close friends and learned about his relationship with Daniel. She eventually obtained Daniel's Instagram handle and began messaging him right away. On that day, Daniel went to report Edwin missing. However, due to his questionable account of events. What detectives found on the CCTV footage, the bloody clothes matching Edwin's, and the numerous scratches and wounds on Daniel's arms, the police arrested him. On August 5th, the police, along with the forensic team, went to the villa Daniel had rented. At the villa, they found numerous areas that had been thoroughly cleaned with bleach. Forensics officials collected hair, water samples, grease stains, and fragments. In the bathroom, they also found traces of blood in the pipes and discovered hair and human tissue. These samples were sent off for expedited testing at Yala province, with preliminary results expected the next day. On August 6th, they also found $8,000 in cash and a gold chain. When questioned, Daniel was angry and claimed he was innocent, insisting they had the wrong person and that the police should be out there trying to find his friend. However, that night, DNA tests from the dump site confirmed that the remains belonged to Edwin. The next day, tests from Daniel's rental villa also confirmed the presence of Edwin's DNA. Police knew they had their culprit. Detectives confronted Daniel with the evidence linking the remains found at the dump and at his villa to Edwin, reminding him of the severe penalties for lying to law enforcement. Daniel caved and admitted he did it, but claimed it was an accident. Daniel said he brought Edwin to the villa to talk to him in person and break off their relationship. He claimed he had tried before, but Edwin just wouldn't listen. He figured if he spoke to him face to face, Edwin would understand. However, Edwin wasn't interested in talking. Instead, he wanted to initiate sex with Daniel. Feeling threatened and fearing that he was about to be violated against his will, Daniel pushed him away. This infuriated Edwin, who had come all the way and was paying for all these expenses. The shoving escalated into a full-blown fight, resulting in scratches on Daniel's arms. In the struggle, Daniel punched Edwin in the face, causing him to fall and lose consciousness. Panicking, Daniel dragged Edwin to the bathroom, splashing water on his face, but he wouldn't wake up. In shock, Daniel waited for an hour before finally panicking and deciding to cut Edwin into pieces. It took him nearly 3 hours to complete the dismemberment, resulting in around 14 body pieces. Daniel then removed the pelvis, penis, 2 legs, and intestines and separated these from the remaining parts. That night, he attempted to rent a kayak to dispose of the remaining parts in the sea. However, the kayak vendor wouldn't rent to him so late at night, so Daniel, frustrated and angry, bought the kayak for $11,000. He then paddled out several times to dump the body parts in the middle of the sea. At 10 p.m. that night, he disposed of the head. At 2 a.m. on August 3rd, he went to the dumping ground and left the remains that were discovered at the start of the episode. At 6 a.m. that morning, he made a second trip to dump more parts in the sea. Interestingly, around the same time he was kayaking, workers discovered the body parts he had dumped earlier that night. That very day, he went to the full moon beach party and had a good time. Finally, he made another trip at 11 p.m. that night on his kayak to dump the remaining parts. Detectives believed Daniel's account of how he disposed of Edwin's body parts, but they did not buy his story that what happened at the villa was an accident. It seemed that Daniel hoped, by being honest about the body disposal, the rest of his story would be more believable. However, detectives saw through his deceit. They had already caught him on CCTV buying the items he used to dismember and dispose of Edwin's body well before the supposed fight occurred. Additionally, Daniel had rented a separate hotel far across the island, which he did not mention to police, took Edwin there as soon as he arrived, and dismembered and disposed of him within hours using tools he had bought a day earlier. This painted a clear picture of premeditated murder. In fact, there was now overwhelming evidence suggesting that the entire trip had been planned for one reason: to lure and murder Edwin Arrieta for reasons only Daniel truly knew. Daniel's plan was to lure Edwin, kill and dismember him, and leave the country before anyone realized what had happened. The police have their own vision of what happened in the villa on August 2nd. After luring Edwin to Kangen under the pretense of vacation hookup, Daniel picked him up as planned, but intentionally took him to a different villa than the one he had booked as his alibi for the police. There, an unsuspecting and exhausted Edwin was struck on the head with a blunt object. Surprisingly, this didn't incapacitate him immediately. To Daniel's surprise, Edwin fought back bravely, putting up a fight against the man who had lured him with pre-planned ill intent. The ensuing struggle left bruises and scratches on Daniel, which were noted by the police later. Then, as planned, Daniel dragged Edwin's deceased or unconscious body to the bathroom, selected for its tiled surfaces and ease of cleaning. He methodically dismembered Edwin using the cutting tools he had bought the day before, turning the bathroom into a makeshift slaughterhouse. He did his best to minimize the mess and contain the blood. After dismembering Edwin into 14 pieces, Daniel placed the remains in garbage bags and cleaned up the scene using cleaning aids and solutions he had purchased. The day earlier, he wanted to dump all the remains at sea that night, but underestimated the availability of the kayak and how challenging it would be to dismember the torso and legs. He therefore improvised by buying the kayak and dumping the large parts directly at the Kangen Waste Disposal Center, assuming no one would bother searching through heaps of garbage at a landfill. Unbeknown to him, garbage collectors always sift through rubble, and this grim discovery was made just hours after he had left it there. Daniel's trips to the sea were also methodical. He paddled out under the cover of darkness, early morning or late night, and far enough at sea to ensure the remains would be scattered and difficult to retrieve. He would then stay the night at the villa he did not dismember Edwin at, so in case police suspected anything, there was no way to find foul play at his location. After checking out at the villa where he dismembered Edwin at 9 a.m. on August 3rd, he attended the full moon party to celebrate the relief of getting rid of a problem in his life. Then, a final trip again at 11 p.m. to dispose of the remaining parts, after which he believed he had covered all his tracks. However, like most criminals who believe they have outsmarted everyone, reality said otherwise. CCTV footage played a key role in solving the crime by establishing his intent before Edwin even stepped foot on the island. The disposal and the clothes Edwin were seen wearing when sitting behind Daniel on the motorbike established a clear sequence of events of what transpired despite his claims of innocence. The detectives knew they had caught a cold and calculated killer. But then, why would Daniel report Edwin's disappearance to the police instead of leaving the island quietly? It turns out Edwin was incredibly close to his sister, and they messaged each other several times a day. Darling Arrieta would later give a heart-wrenching interview on Colombian TV, revealing that she had suspected Daniel from the very first moment. She didn't know Daniel personally, so she had to contact him through Instagram, a connection she obtained from Edwin's friends. Darling recalls telling Edwin's friends when he stopped responding on August 2nd, "We are worried, we have no information." That's when she discovered that the Spanish chef was also in Thailand with her brother. She asked him directly, "What do you know about my brother?" His response was chilling, "I lost track of him on the beach." Darling's alarm bells went off immediately. Good God, how can he be a friend and not know where he is, she thought. This made her suspect Daniel from the beginning. Desperate for answers, Darling urged him to run to the police station to report Edwin missing, but she didn't stop there. "I contacted the consul of Colombia. I told her not to let this man leave Thailand because I suspected him," she explained. The consul then alerted Thai authorities to be on the lookout for Daniel, which explains why the police were so suspicious when he came to report Edwin missing. Unfortunately, the next call Darling received was one she was not prepared for. She recalls the moment. "The consul told me they had found a body. I asked, 'Is it my brother?' They remained silent, and at that moment, I knew it was my brother." Her voice broke, and she couldn't hold back her tears. It was Darling's unrelenting perseverance and quick thinking that pressured Daniel into filing the missing persons report. The tip-off from the Colombian consulate to the Thai authorities ensured Daniel was kept under scrutiny, giving the police the time they needed to collect more evidence. The DNA results that came back on August 6th confirmed that the bloody body parts and fluids in Daniel's rented villa were indeed Edwin's. Why did Daniel do it? Daniel and Edwin's story began about a year ago. Edwin reached out to Daniel through Instagram, and they began exchanging messages and phone calls. These interactions became increasingly flirtatious over time, escalating to intimate images, sexual encounters, and dates in Spain. The relationship went beyond the physical and emotional. Edwin even invested €10,000 as they intended to start a restaurant business in Spain together. He also allowed Daniel to use his credit card for purchases. However, the relationship was complicated. Daniel had a girlfriend, Laura, with whom he had been for the last 5 years. They were planning a wedding in both Spain and Thailand. Furthermore, despite their various sexual encounters, Daniel did not see himself as a homosexual and wanted to end his relationship with Edwin. But this did not sit well with Edwin, who had invested his time, money, and soul in this newfound friendship. According to Daniel, Edwin couldn't let go and threatened to publish their intimate photos and videos, thus ruining his and his family's reputation. I must note that despite Daniel coming from a family of famous people, leaking these details would undoubtedly also hurt Edwin's reputation as a plastic surgeon. Furthermore, there was no evidence to suggest that Edwin was threatening to make such a move. In a shocking reveal, a friend of Edwin claimed in an interview that Edwin had lent Daniel 900 million pesos, equivalent to €216,000, to open a restaurant in Spain. The restaurant was meant for them, and they would be equal partners in its success. In fact, just a few weeks before the crime, Daniel's father had mentioned how proud he was of his son for opening and running 2 restaurants in Spain. Now we know, at least partially, where this success came from. It seems the strongest motive for ending Edwin's life was for Daniel to pocket the money and future profits of this restaurant and get rid of a problem in his life that would have otherwise tarnished his and his family's reputation if word got out about his secret sugar daddy. Furthermore, Daniel's behavior displayed no hint of remorse. The day after dismembering Edwin and before his last kayaking trip to dispose of the remains, he attended a full moon beach party on August 3rd. What person attends a party if they are mourning the accidental loss of their dear friend? In an interview with the Spanish press, Daniel said this about Edwin: "I'm guilty, but I was Edwin's hostage. He held me hostage. It was a glass cage, but it was a cage. He made me destroy the relationship with my girlfriend, forced me to do things I would have never done. He was obsessed with me. He deceived me, made me believe that he wanted to do business with me, to put money into the company of which I am a partner, that we would do things together. But it was all a lie. All he wanted was me, for me to be his boyfriend." On August 6, 2023, Daniel was surrounded by police officers and toured around the island of Koh Phangan to reconstruct the murder of his 44-year-old Colombian lover, Surgeon Edwin Arrieta Arteaga. On Monday, August 7th, the judge of the island's provincial court sentenced him to provisional detention until his trial. Prosecutors were seeking the death penalty against Daniel Sancho. But in August 2020, the King of Thailand commuted the death sentence to life imprisonment for a different case where a Spaniard was also involved, paving the way for extradition. It's expected the same would happen to Daniel, despite the sentence being handed down by the courts. In April 2024, the charges were laid against Daniel Sancho. The charges included premeditated murder, concealment of a body, and destruction of other people's documents. Sancho pleaded not guilty to premeditated murder and destruction of documents, but pleaded guilty to hiding the victim's body. Edwin's families do not want the death penalty for Daniel, but believe he should be punished with another punishment suiting the gravity of his crime. Daniel's sentencing is pending, and his trial is ongoing. However, I will share an update in our Crimes Anatomy community post, so be sure to never miss an update by hitting that subscribe button and clicking on that notification bell. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. This is a truly shocking crime from Indonesia, and the only case I've covered to date where the prosecution won an appeal for a harsher sentence against the convicted. It was around 6:30 a.m. on a seemingly ordinary Wednesday, March 5th. The Bira toll road in Jakarta, Indonesia buzzed with the early morning rush. Among the commuters were two professional crane operators, Dion and Sarwoko, driving towards Pondok Indah. As they navigated the bustling road, Dion's eye caught something unusual, a shape lying between the asphalt and the grass. At first, it seemed like a discarded mannequin. Curiosity, and he brought the truck to a halt, reversed slightly, and stepped out to investigate. What he discovered was far more horrifying than he could have imagined. It wasn't a mannequin, but a corpse. The body lay still, with a blue blackened face and messy hair, dressed in a white shirt and black trousers. A red rubber bracelet with the words Java Jazz was visible on the left arm. The condition of the body was so severe that Dion had difficulty recognizing the face. Shaken, Dion rushed back to the truck to call the police. Within minutes, toll patrol officers arrived, swiftly covering the body with a sheet. Moments later, the police appeared on the scene. The face was blue, barely recognizable, and swarming with flies. Yet oddly, there was no strong odor. The body was quickly transported to the hospital for an autopsy and identification. Thanks to the fingerprints and the distinctive bracelet, the victim was swiftly identified. She was Adesea Angelina Saruto, just 19 years old. Indonesia's Advanced Identity Card System, EKTP, played a critical role in the rapid identification. This system requires every citizen's fingerprints to be recorded and stored centrally, enabling swift matches even when the face is unrecognizable. The red rubber bracelet provided a clue to her recent past. It was from a local jazz festival she had attended just days before. This was confirmed soon after her identification. The details of the victim were reported to the Basi City Police, who had her residential address in Rawamangun, East Jakarta. Ade Sara was a bright second-semester student at the Bunda Mulia College, majoring in psychology. She had a passion for learning German and regularly attended evening classes at the Goethe Institute of Jakarta. The only child of Mr. Saroto and Elizabeth Diana, she was last seen by her parents on March 3rd, when she was expected to attend her German language course that evening. The officers faced the grim task of delivering this devastating news personally to Ade Sara's parents. The autopsy had revealed a truth. Her body bore numerous wounds caused by blunt force trauma, inflicted over a period leading up to her death. Ultimately, she had suffocated. It was a clear indication of murder. The day before Ade Sara was last seen by her parents, on March 2nd, she had attended the Java Jazz Festival, enjoying the event like any other college student. She tweeted online about the event, unaware of the dark fate that awaited her. Ade Sara's father was absolutely stunned by the news, bewildered by the fact that he had just reported her missing the day officers showed up at their doorstep with the grim news of her fate. On Monday, March 3, 2014, Ade Sara said goodbye to her father, Saroto, who drove her to Klender Station so she could take the train to campus. She planned to attend her German class at the Goethe Institute at 6:30 p.m. This was the last time her parents saw her alive. Some sources suggest that Ade Sara mentioned she would stay over at a friend's place that night. The next day, March 4th, her father initially thought there might be a problem with her cell phone, perhaps a dead battery. He expected to reach her later, but by 10 p.m. that day, with no contact, worry set in. Desperate, Sarah's father went out to search for her, checking places he thought she might be, and asking her friends at the German language school, but she was nowhere to be found. The family filed a missing persons report the next day. When Sarah's parents were brought to identify her body, they were unable to recognize her due to the condition it was in. Her face was entirely blackened, and her body was covered in wounds. The grief-stricken family were left with more questions than answers. What had happened to Ade Sara in those final hours, and who was responsible for this brutal act? It turned out that Sara never showed up to her German class. On March 3rd, Nadia Amanda Pami, her 22-year-old German language tutor, grew worried as Sara was never late to class by 8 p.m. Nadia had tried calling her twice, but there was no answer. Detectives began questioning Sarah's friends, uncovering a crucial lead. Sarah had messaged a friend mentioning plans to meet a girl, Aifa, in the Gondangdia train station. Aifa, 18 years old, had reached out to Sarah seeking advice and guidance on registering for German lessons. Aifa was dating Sarah's ex-boyfriend Hyde, whom Sarah was trying to avoid. Sarah and her ex-boyfriend Hyde had a complicated past. Both 19 years old, they had attended the same high school and dated for about a year. Their relationship ended when Hyde cheated on her and refused to admit it. After the breakup, Hyde wanted to reconcile, but Sarah was resolute in her decision to move on. According to Elizabeth, Sarah's mother, Hyde initially appeared to be a polite, kind, caring, and very romantic person who came from a well-off background, as his father was a doctor. Elizabeth knew that Sarah had ended her relationship with Hyde due to his infidelity. When the police interviewed Nadia, Sarah's German tutor, they learned that Sarah had confided in her about the severity of their breakup and its aftermath. Sarah described Hyde as jealous and possessive throughout their relationship, presenting a loving exterior while being extremely controlling. It is possible that his cheating was the final straw, and the breakup provided Sarah with a much-needed escape from his controlling behavior. Sarah wanted to sever all connections and ties with him, even going as far as deleting all their photos together from her cell phone. She was determined to move forward with her life. As will be revealed, Hyde's efforts to win her back could only be described as harassment. Furthermore, the differences in their religious backgrounds strengthened Sarah's resolve to end the relationship. Yet, Hyde continued to bother her on social media, even going as far as hiring someone to hack into her accounts, despite his current relationship with Aifa. Hyde still contacted Sarah, a fact known to Aifa. After the planned meeting on March 3rd, no one heard from Sarah again. Her friend from German class, Addie, also raised the alarm by posting a photo of her on Twitter the next day with the message, "Missing, last seen at Gondangdia station, March 3rd afternoon." With these revelations, the police wanted to look into her ex-boyfriend, Ahmed Imam al-Hafid, or Hyde. They believed that somehow his obsession with her and the fact that his current girlfriend had contacted Sarah to meet on the very day she was last seen was more than just a coincidence. On March 5th, investigators returned to Kaito Mangunkumo Hospital in Salima, central Jakarta, to collect the results of Sarah's post-mortem. They also sought more information from Sarah's friends, who were gathered at the hospital mourning the loss of their beloved friend. Sarah's friends described her as a kind, humorous, and friendly person. The atmosphere was heavy with grief and disbelief. The autopsy revealed the horrifying details of her final moments. When Sarah was found, there were bruises on her hands, neck, and feet. Her face was blue, almost unrecognizable, and her mouth was stuffed with newspapers. The cause of her death was suffocation due to a piece of newspaper lodged in her throat. The numerous bruises indicated she had been beaten with a blunt object, suggesting she endured abuse hours before her death. Among those mourning at the hospital were Hyde and Aifa. They appeared shocked and expressed their condolences, even taking to social media to curse the person responsible for Sarah's demise. Hyde looked particularly upset and distraught. The police questioned Hyde and noted that he did not have a strong alibi on the night Sarah disappeared. Some sources say the police noticed a bite mark on his hand. The police arrested Hyde the next day, March 6th. Hyde, who was apprehended at 4 p.m. at RSCM Central Jakarta while he was mourning the victim, did not take long to confess. During questioning, he told the police about the involvement of his girlfriend, Aifa, and she was arrested an hour later at Kalus University in Pamas, East Jakarta. The police observed that during questioning, neither suspect showed any remorse. In fact, they even laughed at times, displaying a chilling indifference to the gravity of their crimes. They admitted that Sarah was killed inside a small Kavisto car along the South Jakarta to East Jakarta route, over what was hours of torture and beatings. The following sequence of events pieced together the journey of Hyde, Aifa, and their victim, revealing a dark and twisted path that led to Sarah's untimely demise. The tragic events of March 3rd unfolded with a sinister precision that was set in motion by Hyde. He asked his girlfriend, Aifah, to set up a meeting with Ade Sara under the pretense of taking German lessons. They were going to meet at the train station and then head to class. According to Aifah, this was the only option as Ade Sara refused to meet him. The couple planned to kidnap Ade Sara, possibly as a plan of revenge. The meeting occurred around 5:30 p.m. When Ade Sara met Aifah, she was friendly and thankful, but soon after, Hyde pretended to coincidentally be in the area and offered them a ride. It's unclear what Aifah told her, but somehow she convinced Ade Sara to get in the car. However, nothing vile would take place just yet. As expected, or perhaps unexpected, Hyde drove them to the German lessons in the Minang area in central Jakarta. Both women got off the car. Hyde and Aifah pretended to have an argument, in which he asked Ade Sara to get back in the car. Once inside, though, the trap was sprung, and the situation turned violent. The two of them started to assault Ade Sara. Worried she might run off, Aifah admitted to having the brilliant plan of asking her to remove her clothes. The shame of being naked in a conservative society would keep her inside the car. Aifah was going to undress Ade Sara herself, but she resisted and chose to undress herself instead. At approximately 7 p.m., the abuse intensified. Hyde kicked Ade Sara in the neck, struck her, and administered electric shocks using a stun gun, tasering her at least 3 times. Aifah participated in the assault, hitting Ade Sara with her shoes in an attempt to muffle her screams. Aifah also shoved newspaper into Ade Sara's mouth. Based on their confession, the prolonged assault ultimately led to Ade Sara losing consciousness around 9:25 p.m. Upon checking Ade Sara's chest, Aifah was unable to detect a heartbeat. She then proceeded to check for a pulse and signs of breathing, but found none. In a grim turn of events, the pair encountered car issues that very night. The vehicle broke down repeatedly, causing them to panic as they contemplated the repercussions of their actions and their next steps. Aifah concealed Ade Sara's body as best she could, positioning her friend's head to the side to give the impression that she was merely sleeping. The initial breakdown occurred near ITC Kuningan apartment, where Hyde sought assistance from a taxi driver to recharge the battery. However, a mere 200 meters later, the car stalled once more. This cycle persisted, with the vehicle failing numerous times throughout the night. They continued driving, seemingly with Ade Sara's lifeless body accompanying them. At 2 a.m., while passing through Kawang, the car failed again. Meanwhile, Aifah put Ade Sara's clothes back on. By 11 a.m. on March 4th, Hyde called a friend for a car battery. When the friend arrived, he inquired about the person still in the back. Hyde nonchalantly responded that it was indeed a body, which his friend dismissed as a morbid joke. Once the car was running again, the duo then started searching for a workshop, but failed to find one in Rawamangun. Finally, at 5:30 p.m., they found a workshop at Salemba. Ade Sara's body was left in the back seat, covered with a pashmina fabric belonging to Aifah. After the car was fixed, they continued their journey to dispose of Ade Sara's body. At some point, they turned off Ade Sara's cell phone, further attempting to erase her presence. At 9 p.m., they entered the West Besi Bentara toll road, arriving at kilometer 49 towards Sikunir. They unceremoniously dumped Ade Sara's body on the side of the toll road. Afterwards, they drove towards the Taji Besi, disposing of various items along the way: tissues, newspapers, and Ade Sara's wallet. Hyde exited the toll road in Jutai C and re-entered, finally stopping at an Indomaret in Pondok Gede to clean up and discard the remaining evidence. They threw away Ade Sara's shoes and bag before returning to their respective homes. Even by Aifah's accounts, Ade Sara's body had been in the car for 21 hours by the time they disposed of it. In the aftermath of the gruesome murder, the suspect, Hyde, attempted to cover his tracks by disposing of Adara's belongings, including her wallet and bag. He even sold her cell phone at a shopping mall for 4 million Indonesian rupiah, approximately $245, as confirmed by AKP Siswo, the head of the Public Relations Subdivision of the Besi City Police. Hyde had sought advice from a friend before selling the phone. Two of Hyde's friends, Ali and Galang, who were studying at the same university, were also questioned by the police as witnesses who had allegedly seen Adara's body in Hyde's car, a Visto. As the investigation progressed, crucial evidence was uncovered, including scraps of newspaper, the victim's high school card, ID card, student ID card, bank savings book, ATM card, and a stun gun, all found in a ditch in front of Hyde's house. The car, with license plate B8238JO, was also seized, along with a pair of women's shoes belonging to the suspect, which were used to beat the victim. According to the police, Hyde's motivation stemmed from frustration over Ade Sara's refusal to communicate with him after their breakup. He couldn't accept that she wanted to move on, and his frustration grew each day she didn't want him back. He wanted to teach her a lesson and expose her to his pain. Aifa, Hyde's new girlfriend, feared abandonment and felt threatened that Hyde might return to Ade Sara. She claimed to be a victim on several occasions, but more on that later. Unsurprisingly, it was Aifa who came up with the idea to humiliate Ade Sara by removing her clothes and stuffing newspaper down her mouth, which ultimately led to Ade Sara's death by suffocation. Despite their claims that the initial intention was merely to kidnap Ade Sara, the presence of a stun gun and the prolonged beatings they inflicted indicated otherwise. They failed to seek help for hours, sold her phone, disposed of her belongings, and dumped her body on the side of the road like trash. Ade Sara, who was described as being as beautiful as her mother, was found in such a decomposed state that even her own father could not recognize her. During the trial, Hyde and Aifa ended their relationship and were noticeably seated separately. Aifa presented herself as an unwilling participant, claiming she complied out of fear of the repercussions of defying Hyde. However, this narrative largely contradicted their initial confession to the police. Both were charged under Article 340 of the Criminal Code for premeditated murder. In a trial held on December 9, 2014, Hyde and Aifa were sentenced to 20 years in prison. In her defense, Aifa insisted, "I never had any intention at all, let alone plan to kill the victim. I never prepared the tools that would be used to kill the victim." She claimed that the dominant person in torturing Ade Sara was Hyde, who had electrocuted her multiple times. Aifa admitted only to slapping Ade Sara and other minor actions, stating, "It was not my intention, but because of Hyde's orders." She found herself in a cornered condition, locked in a car, under pressure from Hyde's feet. "I was afraid and confused about what to do." Her voice quivered as she described the fear and panic that had overtaken her. Aifa painted a picture of terror, saying, "Seeing Hyde carried out this abuse, I just kept quiet and was afraid to see what he was doing. In a panicked state of unstable mind, I just followed what Hyde ordered because I was afraid it would happen to me, considering Hyde's temperamental and angry nature." Her testimony portrayed a young woman overcome by fear and manipulated into compliance. Aifa Ramadani reportedly fainted as she was led out of the courtroom on July 9, 2015. The Supreme Court granted the prosecutor's appeal, increasing the sentences for both Hyde and Asifa to life imprisonment. This decision marked them as some of the youngest individuals to receive such a severe punishment in Indonesia. The court remarked how Ade was an only child and the irreplaceable lifelong loss and grief this had caused her parents, whose lineage ended with her demise, is a cruelty that must be recognized. These are important factors in Indonesian culture and courts. This case caused massive public outcry all over Indonesia. The fact that the perpetrators were a teenage couple raised a discussion regarding youth violence. Looking at the couple's social profile, Aifa seemed like just another normal youngster, whereas Hyde had shown cyberbullying towards Ade after the breakup via Twitter and hacking. Youth violence, characterized by aggressive acts like physical harm or even death, is alarmingly common around the world. For instance, in the USA, homicide is the third leading cause of death amongst 15 to 19-year-olds. Friends and family continue to speak fondly about Ade, mentioning how, due to her kind, humorous, and friendly nature, she was willing to help anyone in need, something Hyde was aware of and used against her to set a deadly trap. Ade Angelina Sorodo, may you rest in peace. Hello friends, Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jessica Disson. A young girl vanished without a trace after being left home alone briefly. The events that followed seemed more like a suspenseful crime novel than a genuine case, as it was difficult to fathom such an occurrence in reality. It took a decade and a half to uncover the truth, and when it was finally revealed, the public was both outraged and stunned by the shocking details that emerged. Jessica Disson was born on May 2nd, 1982, in the small American town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. It was a quiet place where a lot of residents were involved in farming and knew each other well. Jessica had two younger brothers, and from an early age, she helped her parents to take care of the kids while they were working. This made Jessica more independent, and her parents could always rely on her. When she was 15, she took a part-time job at a local restaurant to save up for her first car. She dreamed of a red Pontiac, and a few years later, she had saved enough money to make that dream a reality. Despite her part-time job, Jessica had excellent grades and started to make plans to attend college to become an accountant. In the fall of 1999, at the age of 17, Jessica began her final year of high school. Excited about a new relationship, she had recently started dating a boy. Friday, September 10th started like any other day. While Jessica slept, her parents left for work, and her younger brothers caught the bus to school. Jessica, who had stayed home, was expected to drive herself to school in her own car shortly after her brothers had left. Somewhere around noon, her mother returned home and immediately noticed something weird. Jessica's car was parked in front of the house, although she should have been in class at that time. The mother entered the house and went to her daughter's room. Her initial thought was that Jessica might have overslept and missed school, but she wasn't in her bedroom. Next, the mother thought that for some reason, Jessica might have asked her father for a ride to school. She called him, but he said he had gone to work alone that morning. Thinking there might be something wrong with Jessica's car, the mother took a spare key from the house to try starting it. However, as soon as she approached the car, she saw a disturbing scene. To begin with, the driver's door was ajar. Even more disconcerting was the sight of Jessica's cell phone on the seat, displaying the partially dialed emergency number 911. Under the front seat, one of Jessica's shoes and her keys were visible, while her textbooks, work attire, and purse were scattered across the back seat. Jessica's mother instantly assumed the worst-case scenario. It was apparent that someone had attempted to call 911 using Jessica's phone, but was interrupted. Furthermore, it was highly improbable that Jessica would have simply abandoned all her personal items in the vehicle and departed on foot, especially considering the family's residence was situated on the periphery of town, necessitating a lengthy trek along the road. Jessica's parents called the school only to hear that their daughter hadn't attended class. Somehow, the school had failed to notify them about this, as it should have done. A few hours later, Jessica's best friend from the restaurant where they both worked called her parents, saying that Jessica hadn't shown up for her shift, increasing their concern. Worried about Jessica's absence from school and work, and the fact that her belongings, including a phone with 911 dialed, were left in an unlocked car, her parents decided to call the police. However, the sheriff simply suggested that Jessica had probably left on her own and would eventually come home. He didn't even pay attention to the fact that one of her shoes was left in the car, which would make it difficult for her to go far without it. Jessica's parents tried to convince the sheriff that their daughter might be in danger, but despite their pleas, he refused to open an investigation, leaving them with no choice but to return home. After that, Jessica's parents decided to take matters into their own hands. They contacted relatives, friends, and acquaintances, but no one had seen her. Together, they started to search for Jessica throughout the town, but she was nowhere to be seen. The next morning, her parents went back to the sheriff and told him that Jessica still didn't make it home. This time, he dispatched 2 officers to inspect her car, but their parents faced yet another problem. The officers examined the vehicle without gloves, touching everything inside with their bare hands. They also didn't check Jessica's room, although it was standard procedure. Once again let down by law enforcement, Jessica's parents tried to get some help from the local media, drawing their attention to their daughter's disappearance and the police's lack of interest, alongside relatives and friends. They initiated their own search and also began distributing flyers with information about Jessica. The search was led by Jessica's father and his brother Stanley, who knew the area well. Fearing the worst, they decided to search the vicinity near a local river. The area had a pretty bad reputation as it was popular among local drug dealers and other criminals due to its overgrown and secluded nature. For hours, Jessica's relatives combed through the difficult terrain near the river, but found no trace of her. The next morning, something extremely weird happened. Jessica's parents were at home, and their son was playing in the yard. Suddenly, he rushed inside, claiming he heard a cry for help that sounded like his sister's voice. Jessica's father grabbed his shotgun and rushed outside, trying to locate the source of the cry. At the same time, his brother drove up to their house and quickly joined the search. Soon they noticed something. There was smoke rising from their neighbor's property, a 40-year-old man named David Brooks. As they approached, they saw him burning something that resembled clothing on his land. It looked highly suspicious, so Jessica's father asked Brooks for permission to search his farm. Brooks, however, refused and asked them to leave. This wasn't the only weird thing about Brooks. Before Jessica's disappearance, her relatives had maintained a normal relationship with him and his family. However, shortly after that, Brooks began behaving strangely. He started regularly driving slowly past their home, staring at them with an ominous smile. Jessica's parents also received mysterious phone calls where an unknown man remained silent and just breathed heavily. They suspected Brooks was behind it, but couldn't understand the reason for such behavior. After witnessing Brooks burning clothing on his property, Jessica's parents decided to once again speak to the police, who had shown little interest in the case from the beginning. They shared their observations, asking officers to visit Brooks with cadaver dogs, and they agreed. Using Jessica's clothes to track her, the dogs led them to the fire pit on Brooks's property, but no substantial evidence was found. The dogs also discovered black gloves in one of the sheds, signaling the presence of a smell associated with decomposition. Throughout the search, Brooks displayed increasingly suspicious behavior, yet the police failed to connect him to Jessica's disappearance, once again leaving empty-handed. Disappointed by the police, Jessica's father decided to reach out to the FBI. The Bureau usually refrains from initiating investigations based solely on calls from the relatives of missing persons, but this time, they decided to get involved immediately, in light of the disturbing facts presented by Jessica's parents. After thorough research, the FBI concluded that something truly horrific might have happened to her. From this point on, a real investigation began, one that local cops had been reluctant to conduct. FBI agents have taken fingerprints in Jessica's room and in her car. They have also seized all potential evidence for analysis and sent everything to the lab. Investigators have also organized an extensive ground search using helicopters and by gathering volunteers. They have thoroughly examined the bottom of the pond near Jessica's house, considering the possibility that her body might be there. FBI agents have meticulously searched Brooks' farm, and that's where they discovered something very alarming. In one of the sheds, they found a printed photo of Jessica. After this disturbing discovery, detectives were almost certain that Brooks was somehow involved in her disappearance. They also suspected his 35-year-old brother Joseph, as he behaved strangely while the police were searching his property. However, there was a problem. During the search, investigators found no evidence substantial enough to arrest the brothers. So they focused all their efforts on the search in the area, almost certain that Jessica was no longer alive. On September 27th, 17 days after her disappearance, the police received a call. A woman was driving along the road near the river where Jessica's father had searched for her in the initial days. She saw something strange near a tree just off the road and decided to inspect it. The woman came closer, realized it resembled a human body, and called the police right away. The FBI agents arrived at the scene and indeed found the lifeless body of a young woman missing some fingers and limbs. She was found with a painted rope tied to her legs, partially undressed, likely sexually abused, and decomposed beyond recognition. Her mother identified her by a small butterfly tattoo. Medical experts confirmed her identity and determined she was strangled to death, had numerous bruises, and her limbs and fingers were detached post-mortem. The most devastating fact was that she had been alive for about 3 days after her disappearance, giving the police a chance to save her, but they did nothing. After the body was found, the FBI re-interviewed Brooks and discovered inconsistencies in his story. He initially claimed to have seen Jessica the morning she disappeared, but later changed his account, saying he was home with his wife, who contradicted him. When asked about hypothetical fingerprint evidence, Brooks's suspicious response was that he'd confess. He failed a polygraph, leading to his arrest, despite a lack of solid evidence linking him to the crime. The detectives continued working on the case, searching for any additional evidence as the trial preparations unfolded. Investigators recalled another interesting detail. During the search of Brooks's car, they found a rope similar to the one used to tie the victim's legs. However, no DNA samples were found on it, making it another piece of circumstantial evidence. The trial began in January 2003. Brooks's lawyer insisted on the complete absence of evidence and declared his client's innocence. Something else came to light during the trial. When the body was discovered, investigators also found some missing limbs of the victim nearby. They placed them in special containers and handed them over to the local police. Ignoring labels that said, "Store it in the refrigerator," they left the boxes at room temperature, causing extensive decomposition. So even if there was some potential evidence, including possible DNA traces from the killer, it was lost due to this error. All other circumstantial pieces of evidence against Brooks lacked sufficient weight. Ultimately, the jurors couldn't reach a unanimous decision, so the man walked free. According to state laws, he could only be charged again if new evidence was found. For Jessica's parents, this was a devastating blow. They had almost no doubt that Brooks was behind their daughter's murder. Moreover, had the police taken their job more seriously, their daughter might have been saved. So in the end, they lost all hope of achieving justice. In the following years, this case remained unsolved, and eventually it was almost entirely abandoned. In 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department. She was assigned to investigate unsolved cases, and her initial focus fell on the murder of Jessica Dish. Upon reviewing the case files, she was shocked by the negligence of her predecessors. Most of the documents were filled with errors, missing any reference to conversations with the involved parties, and the evidence wasn't properly documented. In other words, it was so ineffectively handled that she had to essentially start the investigation from scratch 13 years after the murder. Her first step was to speak with Jessica's family. One of her brothers, now an adult living separately from his parents, handed her a box of Jessica's belongings from her car. He had kept it since the police returned these items to the family. Once again, Hunt was astonished at how carelessly her colleagues had handled the evidence, failing to store it properly according to protocol. Now, after so many years, these items were unlikely to help her. Hunt persisted in her meticulous examination of the documents. She soon discovered an interesting detail. Brooks' medical report indicated an IQ of only 61. This called into question all the interrogations, because with such low intelligence, he may have misunderstood the questions and given inadequate answers. Hunt came to believe that this man was probably not connected to the case, his strange behavior explained by his extremely low IQ. Then, Hunt began to think about who else could have committed this murder. She extensively researched everyone involved in the case or living nearby. This went on until September 2014, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death, when a colleague from another department called Hunt to share intriguing information. An inmate from a Kentucky state prison claimed to know the real identity of Jessica Dish's murderer. Hunt approached this lead with slight skepticism. Usually, when inmates wanted to share some information with the police, it ended in disappointment and wasted time. Many of them just imagined stories to secure early release or improve their conditions in prison. Still, she understood that she couldn't ignore this lead without verification. She went to the prison and met with the man who supposedly had the information. According to him, he shared a cell for some time with an individual convicted of child abuse, the same charge as his. On this common ground, the two became friends and occasionally exchanged details about their crimes. One day, the cellmate told him that, among other things, he had murdered Jessica Dish. After that, the informant dropped a bombshell, giving the detective the name of this man, leaving her in shock. It was Stanley Dish, Jessica's uncle, her father's brother. According to the informant, Stanley told him that he had sexually abused Jessica for several years while living in their home. He threatened to kill her or someone close to her if she ever talked about it. In the spring of '99, when Jessica got a boyfriend, Stanley began to fear that sooner or later she might confess to him about the abuse by her own uncle. On the morning of September 10th, Stanley arrived at her home when Jessica was alone. She was outside getting into her car, having already loaded all her belongings. Stanley approached her and demanded that she break up with her boyfriend, but Jessica refused and threatened to expose him if he didn't leave her alone. He started threatening her, and she reached for the phone, attempting to dial 911. Stanley tried to grab her, but Jessica broke free and ran into the house. The man followed her to her room, struck her, and bound her in her sheets before taking her to an abandoned shed not far from where her body would later be found. Stanley kept her alive there for several days, subjecting her to abuse and torture. Then, he killed her, moved the body to a visible location near the road, and buried the sheets in the ground beneath the shed. He also mentioned that after the murder, he removed some of the victim's limbs, hoping to mislead the police into thinking drug traffickers were involved. Detective Hunt realized that this information was never disclosed. Only Jessica's closest relatives knew about the missing limbs, so the informant couldn't have fabricated this detail. At last, he also added that Stanley buried Jessica's shoe beneath a broken tree near the shed. Hunt decided to verify all this information about the buried evidence. Given the shortage of staff in the local police department, no one from there could help her, so she reached out to Jessica's brother and a few other relatives who agreed to participate in the search. She didn't tell them that Stanley might be the murderer, as she decided to find some evidence to support these shocking accusations first. On the first day of the search, they failed to uncover any clues under the pouring rain. They dug in the areas matching the informant's description, but it yielded no results. The next day, Jessica's brother and Hunt returned to the site. On the way, he pointed out an abandoned barn alongside the road. They headed there and started digging the soil inside, and almost immediately, there was a long-awaited breakthrough. They discovered a buried bedsheet. Hunt collected the evidence and hurried to Jessica's home. Throughout these years, her parents hadn't made any changes to her room. It remained exactly as it was on the day their daughter vanished. Thanks to this, Hunt was able to confirm that the found bedsheet was part of Jessica's bedding. It was absent from the bed, and the other linen shared the same pattern. Immediately after this discovery, Stanley was arrested and brought in for questioning. He refused to confess to the crime, although he appeared visibly shaken during the conversation with the detectives. Stanley, accused of murdering his niece Jessica, left her father in disbelief. Initially in denial, he later realized Stanley had misled the search party when Jessica first vanished, steering them away from the barn where she was held, only yards away from where Stanley claimed to be ill. While readying for trial, Detective Hunt delved into the suspect's history for more proof. She found he had not only assaulted a family member before, but several female relatives also reported childhood sexual abuse by him. Hearing all of these stories, The police concluded that Stanley had been doing this for 3 decades. Despite all of this, Detective Hunt realized that securing a conviction for the murder would be challenging, since there were almost no straight pieces of evidence against Stanley, such as fingerprints or DNA. She continued to dig into the case until she stumbled upon a box of old files she hadn't examined yet. Looking through its contents, Hunt was once again shocked by the incompetence of her predecessors who initially handled the case. In the box, there was a letter dated June 26, 2002. Another informant wrote to the police the same story that Hunt heard only 12 years later from the Kentucky prison inmate. By the summer of 2002, Stanley was already serving time for assaulting an underage relative. During that time, he told his cellmate about murdering Jessica. The cellmate, who happened to be a police informant, wrote a letter to the department handling the case, disclosing all the gruesome details of what Stanley had done to his niece. And what do you think the police did? They simply ignored the letter, likely convinced of Brooks's involvement in those years, so they didn't bother considering other suspects. Once again, Hunt was disappointed by her colleagues' lack of professionalism. If only they had paid more attention to their job, this case could have been solved back in 2002. By now, after all these years, she could only await the trial, hoping that Stanley would finally face delayed justice for his actions. The process began in 2015, and Stanley declared his innocence. Present in the courtroom, Jessica's parents could hardly look at their relative who had destroyed their lives. They were also furious that he couldn't just confess to give them some sort of closure. The prosecution believed that the chances of obtaining a guilty verdict on murder charges were relatively low, mainly because there was almost no substantial evidence against him. There was also a problem with the assault charges involving other girls in the family. All of them would have to testify in court, describing Stanley's actions against them in great detail. So the prosecution decided to offer Stanley a plea deal. They agreed to drop the death penalty in exchange for Stanley's confession, both in assaults on relatives and Jessica's murder. In the end, he agreed and pleaded guilty. As part of the deal, he wasn't required to disclose any specific details of the crimes. Jessica's parents, who desired to know the whole truth, weren't happy about it, but Stanley remained silent. Under the plea deal terms, the murderer received a 20-year prison sentence with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Given that he was 56 at the time of sentencing, Stanley might be released at 71. After the trial, Jessica's father promised that if his brother doesn't die in prison, he'll be waiting for him to take matters into his own hands. In 2019, Stanley gave his first interview, claiming he didn't kill Jessica. According to him, he was at work that morning, but it was impossible to verify after 2 decades. He also couldn't explain how 2 unrelated informants came up with identical stories, including details only known to the murderer, such as a bedsheet burial site. As for David Brooks, detectives still don't rule out his potential minor involvement in the case. Stanley knew him and could have asked for help in disposing of the victim's belongings. Given Brooks's low IQ, he might not have fully understood the whole situation. It's possible that he burned the girl's clothes in the fire, and Stanley might have handed him the gloves with the scent of the body that the dogs detected. It's also possible that he left Jessica's photo in Stanley's shed to frame him. However, the truth may never be revealed, as Brooks passed away in 2021 due to heart problems. It's worth mentioning the moment when, on the 3rd day of Jessica's disappearance, her younger brother heard a cry for help outside, thinking it was his sister. It's still impossible to say with certainty what happened at that time. The girl could have still been alive, but Stanley was holding her in the barn a few miles away from her home. Most likely, the child either imagined it due to stress or someone else was screaming. However, there's a somewhat unlikely version. As we recall, right after Jessica's father rushed outside, Stanley drove up to the house, which means he was nearby. It could be that the girl was in his car with her mouth taped shut or unconscious. However, this theory seems highly improbable. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Lisa Holm was born on February 7, 1998, in the small Swedish town of Jo, where she had a peaceful upbringing with her parents and older sister. Known for her kindness, positivity, and determination, Lisa decided early on that she wanted to study architecture in Australia. Growing up, she traveled extensively with her family, visiting many countries around the world. As an independent young woman, Lisa worked various part-time jobs since her teenage years to earn her own money. Before the summer of 2015, 17-year-old Lisa secured her first serious job at a cafe located approximately a 40-minute drive from her home. Initially, her parents drove her to work, but after a few weeks, her father decided to purchase a scooter for her. However, during the first few weeks, her father followed her in his scooter to ensure her safety, given her limited experience driving on the roads. As Lisa only worked on weekends, her father accompanied her every morning and evening during this period. This went on until June 7th, when he finally let her drive to the cafe alone. Somewhere around lunchtime, her parents decided to visit her at work and have lunch together that day. The cafe was pretty crowded, so Lisa was really busy with work. She took a short break for lunch, had a snack with her parents, and they went back home. At 6:23 p.m., Lisa sent a text message to her father informing him that she was leaving work. However, just 3 minutes later, her father received a call from her. When he answered the phone, there was no response from the other end. Instead, he could hear some indistinct voices in the background, leading him to believe that Lisa had accidentally dialed his number. He assumed she was engaged in a conversation with her colleagues. Additionally, he heard the sound of a scooter door being closed forcefully. He repeatedly called out Lisa's name, but there was still no answer. Eventually, he ended the call and began waiting for Lisa to arrive home. However, she never showed up. An hour passed, and Lisa's parents started to worry. She should have arrived by now, so her father immediately thought something might have happened to her on the way. It was her first time riding alone on the scooter, and he was deeply concerned about her safety. He tried calling her several times, but Lisa's phone was off. After waiting a few more minutes, her father decided to hit the road, hoping to meet her along the way since Lisa should have taken the shortest route. The father, concerned that Lisa might have met with an accident, drove slowly, meticulously examining the road, but couldn't find her anywhere. He reached the cafe without any success in locating his daughter. As he arrived at her workplace, he noticed Lisa's scooter parked in front of the building. By this point, the man was already panic-stricken, having failed to find her along the entire route. The sight of her scooter provided immediate relief, making him think that she might have been held up at work for some reason. However, the cafe was empty, and he noticed something unusual. Lisa's scooter keys were still in the ignition, with her helmet hanging from the handle. This observation led him to suspect that something unfortunate might have happened to his daughter, as she would never carelessly leave the keys in the scooter and abandon it unattended in the parking lot. Meanwhile, Lisa's mother called the cafe owner in hopes of shedding light on her daughter's whereabouts, but the woman claimed to have no idea where she could have gone. She had called her employees around 6 p.m., and they said they were closing the cafe. After the call from Lisa's mother, the cafe owner immediately got into her scooter and headed there. On the way, she called 4 of her friends who lived nearby and asked them to help with the search. When the cafe owner arrived at the scene, they, along with Lisa's father, began searching both the establishment itself and the surrounding area. Their last hope was that Lisa, for some reason, might have decided to take a bus instead of the scooter. They checked the schedule, and her mother, along with Lisa's older sister, drove to the bus stop in their town. Unfortunately, this version was not confirmed. Lisa was not on the bus, so her relatives immediately contacted the police by that time. It was almost 1 p.m. and it had already gotten dark outside. The police immediately launched extensive searches. The fact that Lisa's scooter was left in the parking lot with the keys led them to consider the possibility of abduction. Cases like this are quite rare in Sweden, especially in the remote provincial area where Lisa's town was located. Therefore, the police immediately dispatched several groups with search dogs, while other officers began knocking on every house located near the cafe. When Lisa's classmates and her friends learned about her disappearance, they began spreading information about it on social media, hoping to attract more attention and possibly find some witnesses. The search continued all night, but it yielded no results. On Monday morning, the police publicly announced Lisa's disappearance and urged anyone with useful information to come forward. Around the same time, a man working in a barn directly opposite the cafe discovered a motorcycle glove on the floor and reported it to the police. The investigators had already inspected this barn on the evening of Lisa's disappearance, but had not noticed the glove there. They showed it to Lisa's parents, who confirmed that the glove did indeed belong to their daughter. This further substantiated the abduction theory, and the police deployed additional resources for the search. By then, news of Lisa's disappearance had spread nationwide, and hundreds of volunteers had joined the search effort. On Tuesday, the police received several more disturbing clues. Volunteers searched the area along a dirt road located a short distance from the cafe. There, they discovered a phone case, a receipt, a ticket, and a shattered smartphone screen. Investigators quickly determined that all of these items belonged to Lisa and concentrated their search in that vicinity. Soon after, they found additional pieces of the broken smartphone, Lisa's identification, and more receipts. All of these items were dispersed along the same dirt road. After the discovery of evidence, the police were almost certain that Lisa had been abducted. They put everything into the search, and more people joined with each passing day. The case became the biggest news in Sweden, and hundreds of volunteers poured in from all over the country. A local organization specializing in finding missing persons also joined in. The search effort for Lisa became the largest in the country's modern history, with over 1,000 participants in total. The police also received numerous calls with leads. One woman reported that she went out for a run the day before Lisa's disappearance. At one point, a man standing next to his scooter stopped her in the middle of the road. He spoke to her in English and asked for directions to a city she had never heard of. She tried to show him the way on Google Maps, but the man asked her to get in his scooter and show him the route on his navigator. The woman found this request quite suspicious, so she refused and continued running. She also shared an interesting detail with the police. The woman believed she had seen this man among the workers who were repairing the same barn located across the road from the cafe. Lisa's colleagues also shared one observation. On the day of her disappearance, one of the witnesses noticed two men standing across the road from the cafe, looking towards the establishment. She didn't think much of it at the time, but after Lisa's disappearance, she decided to share this fact with the police. The next morning on Wednesday, Lisa's father, along with some friends, went to search the dirt road where her belongings were found. Walking a bit further, he made several more alarming discoveries. He found Lisa's driver's license and her house keys. It all seemed as if Lisa was being taken along this road away from the cafe, while the abductor was throwing her belongings out of their scooter or other vehicle they used to kidnap her. The police and volunteers concentrated all their efforts on this area, but no other items were found. That same evening, a friend of Lisa's father was returning home from the search. Passing by the cafe, he noticed that the police tape had been removed from the barn where Lisa's glove was found. The man decided to go inside and look for any other clues once more. He grabbed a flashlight from his scooter, as it was already getting dark outside, and walked around the premises for several minutes until something shiny on the floor caught his attention. When he looked closer, he saw a woman's earring and another one just like it nearby. The man reported this to the police, who showed the earrings to Lisa's parents. They confirmed that the earrings belonged to their daughter. The police once again sealed off the barn and searched it more thoroughly. The lead detective later explained that on the first day of Lisa's search, their main focus was on finding the girl herself, so the barn was not inspected as thoroughly. They might have missed such small items as earrings, but now they brought in numerous forensic experts along with search dogs. This time, they spotted an odd clue behind a wall: human poop. Forensic experts say when crooks do terrible crimes, their body makes lots of adrenaline, sometimes making them need to go real bad. Like killers often wet themselves before or during the murder. Since Lisa's stuff was in the barn, cops think the perp might have took her there. So, they reckon this person, all hopped up on adrenaline and couldn't hold it. The poop got sent off for DNA testing. On Friday, the search area was expanded and volunteers reached a farm about 3 kilometers from the cafe. It was a facility with several large buildings where many people worked. The search team decided to inspect all the buildings. Shortly after arriving, 2 English-speaking men showed up. One claimed that the police had already searched the farm, but the team leader doubted this and continued the search. The men observed the volunteers for a while before driving away. The other day, the search team found a pile of wood behind the cowshed. Underneath, they found a helmet, a coat, and a motorcycle headset. The police arrived on site and confirmed that all these items belonged to Lisa. They sent police experts to conduct a more extensive search of the farm. Detectives also heard stories about 2 strange men who had tried to discourage volunteers from inspecting the farm. The police also recalled the story of a woman who had met a suspicious man while she was jogging. Meanwhile, forensic experts arrived at the farm together with the volunteers. They continued to inspect this area, and soon their attention was drawn to an old trailer. It was surrounded by tall grass and looked as if it hadn't been used in many years. But next to its door, the grass was flattened as if something had been lying there recently. Some of the grass was also trapped under the door, indicating that it had been recently opened. As soon as the forensic experts opened the door, they were immediately met with a strong smell of decay. Inside the trailer, there were many lockers for clothing. Apparently, it was once used as a changing room for workers. All the lockers except one were locked, leading the experts to suspect that Lisa's body might be in one of them. They began opening each locker and eventually saw that Lisa's body was actually in one that was left open, hidden behind a pile of old clothes and rags. Despite the small size of the locker, the perpetrator managed to fit their victim inside. Lisa had a rope around her neck and a large amount of tape over her head. Her pants were pulled down and her shirt was pulled up. Medical experts determined that Lisa died from strangulation. However, they found no signs of sexual assault. All of her clothing was handed over to the lab, while news of the discovery of her body rapidly spread throughout the country. All this time, the news of Lisa's abduction dominated headlines in Sweden. When her body was found and the public learned of Lisa's brutal murder, the case shook the entire country. Such crimes were extremely rare in Sweden, and people were shocked that someone could commit such a heinous act. The Lisa body been discover, something way day eerie happen. YouTube users come see one video we dem post 13 days before the murder. The video name na 13, and he get countdown timer. The name of the channel we post them sef they worry people, them call him Lisa home. News of the video spread well, people come day surprised. Some people talk say somebody don't predict the murder, but no be so. Now just be like say, person changed the channel name and video title after them find Lisa body. Maybe the person just wants start a notatory or they play wicked prank. Meanwhile, the police were doing everything in their power to find the killer as quickly as possible. At the time of Lisa's discovery, investigators had already brought in 2 brothers and a woman, and they all denied any involvement in the murder. They claimed that at the time of the abduction, they were at home, providing alibis for each other. According to their accounts, the older brother, Naris, was asleep in his room while his wife was preparing dinner, and the younger brother was on the computer. Naris also added that around 8 p.m. he woke up and went to the gas station, where he bought pizza and cigarettes. The police were pretty skeptical of their alibis, as all 3 could have simply been covering for each other. They collected their DNA samples, but investigators still lacked any evidence directly linking any of them to the murder. However, this didn't last long. Forensic experts were working in the barn and on the farm, using all their resources and manpower, and their efforts soon paid off. In the barn, there was a small office-like room with a large window overlooking the cafe. While examining this room, experts found 15 traces of semen from men on the walls near the window and on the floor. It seemed as if someone had stood there, watched the cafe staff, including Lisa, and pleasured himself. The semen samples were immediately sent to the laboratory, and experts quickly extracted DNA profiles from them. All 15 semen traces matched the DNA of 35-year-old brother Naris. The same was true for the feces found in the barn. They also belonged to him. In the next room, which had previously been used for storing cow's milk, forensic experts noticed a pipe about 2 feet above the floor, covered in a thick layer of dust except for a small strip. The size of this strip perfectly matched the rope used to strangle Lisa. Traces of blood were also found on this pipe, and the DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Naris. On the floor beneath the pipe, they discovered a piece of the same rope. Experts examined it and identified 2 DNA profiles, Lisa's and Naris's. This was a significant breakthrough for the police. It finally linked the man to the rope used to kill the victim. Furthermore, a hair belonging to Lisa was found on the floor of this room. Another crucial piece of evidence came from her jacket. DNA traces belonging to Naris were also found on it. Based on this evidence, the police believed that she was killed right there. They pieced together an approximate sequence of events. Naris had been observing the cafe for some time, and when Lisa was alone in the parking lot, he approached her. Based on the jogger's account, he could have asked Lisa for directions to a certain city or used some other tactics. Then, Naris might have asked her to get into his scooter to enter the route into the GPS system. Considering Lisa was kind-hearted and always tried to help others, she might have agreed. Once she was in the scooter, the perpetrator taped her mouth shut and drove her to the barn. There, he wrapped the rope around her neck and hung her from the pipe. According to the medical experts, this sight likely excited him so much that he defecated on the floor due to an adrenaline rush. When she died, he placed Lisa's body in the scooter and drove to the farm, tossing her belongings out the window along the way. There, he hid the body in the trailer locker, covering it with old clothes scattered around. All of this, from the moment of the abduction, took the perpetrator less than an hour. Despite all the evidence, Naris continued to insist on his innocence. His wife and younger brother had to be released because there was nothing against them. Once free, they almost immediately left Sweden and returned to their homeland, Lithuania. The preparation for the trial was intense. Naris just claimed he had worked in that barn for a long time, suggesting his DNA could have been present there due to his job. Additionally, he had an alibi provided by his wife and brother, although there were serious doubts about the credibility of both sources. In court, this could have definitely worked in his favor. On the other hand, the presence of Naris's DNA on the victim's clothing could only be explained by direct contact with her on the day of the murder. The police also found a witness who saw his scooter near the cafe shortly before and after Lisa's abduction. According to them, the scooter passed along the road between the cafe and the farm several times at the same time when Naris was supposed to be sleeping at home, according to his brother and wife. For several months after the discovery of her body, experts continued to examine all the available evidence using the most advanced equipment. Eventually, they uncovered traces of Naris's DNA on almost all of Lisa's clothing, including the inside of her underwear. Considering that the whole country was still following the case, investigators continued to search for any other useful clues that could impact the legal process and further prove Naris's involvement. They even went to Lithuania to speak with his wife and brother once again. The woman continued to insist that he did not leave the house between 6 and 8 p.m. But when it was the younger brother's turn, detectives suddenly got what they wanted. After telling him about all the evidence against his brother and detailing what he did with the 17-year-old girl, the man decided to tell them everything. He claimed that Naris actually was not at home that evening and only returned around 7:30 p.m. He was covered in dirt and immediately threw all his clothes into the washing machine. When the police started to question all the residents and reached their house, Naris whispered to his brother, "Tell them I was home at that time." Later, Naris explained that he was afraid he would be framed for a crime he didn't commit because he was an immigrant and had no alibi for the time of the abduction. The younger brother truly believed that his relative had nothing to do with it, but after hearing about all the evidence, he realized it wasn't the case. Lisa's funeral took place only a month after her murder. The church where it was held could only accommodate 130 people, but there were many more who came to say goodbye to her. Organizers even decided to set up benches and large screens outside so that everyone could watch the ceremony. The trial began 4 months after the murder. This case once again captured the attention of the entire country, so everyone involved in the process was under tremendous pressure. None of them had the right to make a mistake. Naris's lawyer insisted that his client's DNA could have ended up on the victim's clothing because he had worked in the barn. The prosecution, however, pointed out that this version made no sense, especially in the case of Lisa's underwear. The only way the suspect's DNA could have ended up there was if he touched the victim's underwear. The lawyer couldn't provide any other solid facts pointing to his client's innocence. At one point, he tried to push the version that the real murderer was Naris's younger brother. According to this theory, the brother somehow took multiple samples of Naris's DNA and placed them on the victim's body as well as at the crime scene. However, the lawyer failed to explain the possibility of such manipulations with the DNA. The trial lasted for a month, and Naris was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in a high-security prison. Given that this is Sweden we're talking about, the facility resembled more of a decent 3-star hotel. His lawyer attempted to appeal the verdict. In early 2017, Naris himself applied for deportation and was transferred to a prison in his homeland, although Lithuanian prisons are significantly worse than Swedish ones. The reasons for this decision were unknown at the time. The court decided to approve his request, despite the fact that providing comfortable conditions of detention cost Swedish taxpayers several hundred per day for each individual inmate. Later that same year, his motives became clear when he appealed to a Lithuanian court, and his sentence was reduced from life to 15 years. However, the joy was short-lived for the murderer, as a few weeks later, the court overturned its decision, and Naris was once again destined to spend his entire life in prison. Only now he had no chance of returning to the comfortable Swedish cell. 5 years later, in August 2022, Naris faced yet another downside of being transferred to a Lithuanian prison. While inmates were being moved to another block, one of them attacked Naris with a shank. He suffered serious injuries and died on the way to the hospital. As for his wife, the question of her involvement is still not entirely ruled out. Police noted that there is practically no chance of her direct involvement in the abduction or murder, as experts would have found her DNA on Lisa's clothing or belongings. However, it cannot be ruled out that she knew of her husband's crime and helped him evade justice by providing a false alibi. Naris's younger brother also raises questions. Cafe employees reported seeing 2 men standing near the barn and watching them. Considering that one of them was likely Naris himself, the second should have been his brother. However, the man's DNA was not found either in the barn itself or on Lisa's clothing, making his involvement in the murder unlikely. Perhaps they were indeed observing the young employees with the older brother and even discussing inappropriate things, but only Naris decided to commit such a heinous crime. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lisa Valdez. Lisa Valdez was born on September 6, 1961 in San Francisco, California. She had a brother and a loving mother, although their father was not involved in their lives. Despite this, Lisa was exceptionally close to her mother, and they almost never argued. Everyone who knew them was always impressed by how perfect their relationship seemed. In her teenage years, Lisa took up dancing, and it became one of her greatest passions. She also had a keen interest in modern technology, getting into the IT field when it was still in its infancy. For instance, she started using email when most of her friends hadn't even heard of it. This interest in technology shaped her future career. After college, Lisa got a job as a software analyst in San Francisco. Later, her mother used her savings to purchase Lisa an apartment in a prestigious neighborhood. It was a small studio, but the building was situated on a hill, offering a beautiful view of the city. Lisa lived in this apartment alone, advancing in her career and spending as much time as possible with her family. She also continued dancing, attending weekly dance practice sessions with her best friend. On May 16, 1998, when Lisa was 36, she invited her mother and some family friends over for the evening. After the guests left, her mother helped with the dishes and headed home. Before she left, Lisa promised to call her the next day, but she never called. At first, her mom figured she was just busy, as Lisa was supposed to go to dance practice that day, so her mom decided to wait. But the whole day went by without hearing from Lisa. The next day, she tried calling Lisa herself, but there was no answer. The mother kept trying to reach her daughter, but Lisa never picked up. On the fourth day, which was a Monday, Lisa's colleagues contacted her mother and informed her that Lisa had not reported to work and was not answering their phone calls. This was highly unusual, as Lisa was a responsible employee who had never missed work without notice. Concerned, her mother decided to go to Lisa's apartment complex to check on her. However, upon arrival, she noticed police tape surrounding the building and a significant police presence. When she inquired about the situation, the police explained that just a few hours earlier, residents had reported a strange odor coming from one of the apartments. The manager had gone to investigate and found the door unlocked, immediately discovering a body on the floor, prompting the call to the police. The officers quickly identified the deceased as Lisa. She was partially undressed, and her body showed clear signs of trauma, indicating it was a murder. Based on the state of decomposition, they estimated she had been dead for several days. The police also suspected she had been assaulted, as her underwear was found next to the body. The room was covered in blood stains, both on the floor and on the bed. The TV was on, and the air conditioner was set to 78 degrees. The apartment was also in disarray, but detectives later discovered that this was normal for Lisa, who wasn't meticulous about keeping things tidy. There were no signs of a robbery, as all of Lisa's valuables, including her jewelry, were left in plain sight. The only things missing were her keys and a gym bag. Another peculiar detail was that the attacker had cut off some of Lisa's long hair and taken it with them. Combined with the numerous injuries on her body, this suggested the presence of strong personal motives. Detectives speculated that the killer might have known Lisa, and for some reason, harbored hatred towards her, supporting the idea that Lisa was familiar with her attacker. This was further supported by the lack of signs of forced entry, and the fact that Lisa's apartment complex was fenced and required either a key or access granted by a resident. The police started interviewing residents of the complex, hoping someone had seen the attacker, and they quickly found their first lead. One of Lisa's neighbors mentioned that 2 days earlier, after returning from vacation, he noticed part of the metal frame of his front door was bent, and there was a faint blood stain on the door. He reported it to the manager, but they decided not to involve the police, since it was clear no one had broken into his apartment. Detectives were almost certain the same person who killed Lisa was responsible for this incident, but the motives behind the actions were unclear. Perhaps the killer tried to break into the neighbor's apartment and was caught by Lisa, leading to her murder. According to another theory, the attempt to break into the neighbor's apartment might have occurred after Lisa's murder, which seemed odd. Detectives also talked to the housekeeper who cleaned Lisa's apartment every week. 2 days before they found Lisa's body, the housekeeper used her key to enter the complex and tried to open Lisa's door, but it was blocked from the inside. She peeked through the crack and saw a partially undressed woman on the floor and heard a man's voice. Assuming she was interrupting something private, she left right away. The police believed Lisa was already dead by then, and the man's voice belonged to her killer, who was still in the apartment. The housekeeper mentioned seeing a black bag with a zipper near the body, but she was unsure as she only glanced at it briefly. Additionally, there was an untouched envelope with cash taped to the inside of Lisa's apartment door. This money was intended for the housekeeper, as Lisa would leave it the day before her scheduled visit since she wouldn't be home. The presence of the untouched envelope suggests that Lisa was likely attacked after her mother's departure, between midnight and early morning, as this was when she would have left the money. This theory was soon confirmed by the neighbors living on the floor below, who reported hearing noises from above that night. They described hearing thumping sounds followed by the sound of someone coming down the stairs, though they did not see who it was. While medical experts examined Lisa's body, detectives continued searching her apartment for clues. They soon noticed something unusual. The toilet seat was up, which was unusual for a woman living alone. Forensic experts examined the toilet seat and found a partial fingerprint that did not belong to Lisa. The police collected fingerprints from all of Lisa's acquaintances and relatives who might have been in her apartment, but none matched this. This led detectives to believe the fingerprint might belong to the killer. The medical experts soon finished their report, giving a new lead. Lisa's body had over 20 stab wounds, but because of the decomposition, they couldn't tell if she had been sexually assaulted. However, they found defensive wounds on her body, indicating that Lisa tried to fight off her attacker. The experts also found skin particles under her nails, likely from the killer, and sent them to the lab for analysis. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined evidence from the apartment and found a crucial clue. One of the pillowcases had numerous blood stains, but analysis revealed that not all the blood belonged to Lisa. Some stains were different, so the pillowcase was sent to the lab for further examination. Investigators theorized that the killer might have accidentally injured himself while stabbing Lisa, which was common in such cases since a knife can easily slip. This theory was supported by another finding inside the toilet. They discovered 2 bandages from a first aid kit, which the killer might have used to stop his bleeding. He also could have left his fingerprints on the toilet seat while throwing away the bandages. DNA analysis showed that the blood on the pillowcase belonged to an unknown man not in the FBI database. The skin particles from under Lisa's nails also matched this man, as did the blood stain on her knee. Although there were no matches in the DNA database, detectives now had the killer's DNA profile. They began comparing it with samples from suspects in their system who had committed crimes in Lisa's area, and also started looking closely at her acquaintances. Lisa's mother revealed that Lisa had been dating a man named Albert Kiddo, and they were supposed to go on a date the day after the murder. However, Kiddo had canceled it just a few days prior. Detectives brought Kiddo in for questioning and immediately noticed a large cut on his hand. They suspected that the killer might have injured his hand while stabbing Lisa, and this is common in such attacks. This immediately made Kiddo a suspect, but he denied any involvement in the murder. The detectives took his fingerprints and DNA samples and sent them to the lab for comparison. To their surprise, none of it matched the blood on the pillowcase and the skin particles from under Lisa's nails, clearly belonging to someone else. Investigators continued searching for other possible suspects and decided to listen to the messages on Lisa's answering machine left in the days leading up to the murder. They compiled a list of 40 callers, but one strange message stood out to them. Just a few hours before the murder, while Lisa still had guests at her home, a man called her, but she didn't pick up, so he left a rather unusual message. You know how it goes. Hey Lisa, are you home? The police played this message for Lisa's friend, who immediately recognized the voice as belonging to a colleague of Lisa's named Albert Robinson. He had repeatedly expressed romantic feelings for Lisa, but she wasn't interested in a relationship with him. They continued to interact at work and in the company of mutual acquaintances, and Lisa considered him a friend. Several days after the murder, during the victim's family's memorial service, something else happened. Robinson showed up and gave a speech that puzzled everyone present. He claimed that he and Lisa were deeply in love, planning to get married and start a family. However, Lisa's friends and her mother stated that Robinson's words were completely untrue. Lisa had told them that Robinson had shown interest in her, but she had no romantic feelings for him. Lisa's mother also stressed their close relationship, saying that Lisa wouldn't have hidden such plans from her. Robinson was questioned, where he denied any involvement in the murder. He claimed he loved Lisa and would never harm her. However, he refused to provide his DNA sample and fingerprints to the police. This evidence pointed to Robinson as the main suspect, and detectives continued searching for new leads. If Robinson was obsessed with Lisa and she did not reciprocate his feelings, it could have driven him to commit the crime. The brutality of the crime suggested personal motives, and the fact that the killer had cut off and taken some of her hair could be connected to his obsession. Detectives eventually obtained a search warrant for Robinson's house, where they found numerous photos of Lisa, further indicating his obsession with her. However, Robinson continued to deny any involvement in the murder. He even provided his fingerprints and DNA samples to the detectives. Although the detectives were almost certain that Robinson was the killer, the lab results showed no match between the samples found at the victim's apartment and Robinson's. Consequently, Robinson was removed from the list of suspects, and the police continued their search for new leads. Despite their efforts, the detectives repeatedly hit dead ends, and the case remained unsolved for years. Investigators repeatedly sought updates on the comparison of the killer's DNA sample and fingerprints with databases, hoping that he would surface for some other crimes, but it never happened. Initially, police found it strange that someone who committed such a brutal crime wasn't in the databases, as they doubted it was his first serious offense. Over the following years, police continued to check for matches in the databases, but they always came up empty. Lisa's mother gave interviews on television multiple times, urging anyone with information to come forward, but detectives still couldn't find any new leads. In 2010, detectives learned that the FBI had started using a new DNA technology to compare suspect samples with individuals in the database to locate their relatives. Unlike genetic genealogy, which emerged several years later, this method only worked with close relatives. For example, experts could find the father or a brother of the DNA owner in the database. With no other leads, in 2011, the police requested such a DNA comparison and began waiting. On September 2nd, the lead detective received a call from the FBI with two pieces of news, one good and one bad. They stated they would not perform the comparison with possible relatives in the database, but the reason was quite unexpected. Before conducting such a comparison, experts always retest the suspect's DNA sample, and this time, 13 years after the murder, it came back as a perfect match. The DNA from the blood and skin particles found under Lisa's nails matched the sample from a 52-year-old man named Anthony Hughes, who had just recently entered the FBI database. The man had an extensive criminal history spanning decades, but none of his crimes required his DNA sample to be entered into the FBI database. With changes in laws, criminals in California were required to submit DNA samples regardless of the severity of the crime, and Anthony's sample ended up in the database after he was arrested for a simple shoplifting incident. His fingerprints were also entered into the databases, and they matched the fingerprint found on the toilet seat in Lisa's apartment. Experts even identified the specific finger that left the print. Pretty easily before arresting the man, detectives attempted to find any other evidence that could connect him to the crime. Here, they encountered a surprising turn of events. 13 years ago, the police listened to messages left for Lisa on her answering machine. However, they only reviewed calls made to her phone before the murder. Now, after all these years, detectives suddenly discovered that Anthony Hughes had called Lisa just a day after her death and left her a message. Its content was quite ordinary and did not raise any suspicions. However, had the police investigated Anthony back then, they would have not only discovered his extensive criminal record, but also something else. Upon reviewing Lisa's belongings, detectives examined her address book and found Anthony's phone number, confirming that the victim knew him. After talking to Lisa's friends, the police learned that she had apparently dated Anthony for a while in high school, and now the detectives had everything they needed to question the man. At that time, he didn't have a fixed address, so they decided to proceed carefully to prevent the suspect from fleeing. They arrested him, saying that the police were investigating a series of robberies in San Francisco, and he surrendered without resistance. During the interrogation, detectives started by asking about a series of robberies before smoothly transitioning to Anthony's criminal record. Eventually, they asked if he knew Lisa Valdez. At first, he said no, but when they showed her photo, he admitted they knew each other from high school. Anthony also claimed he hadn't seen her since the late 80s. Over several hours, detectives questioned him about the relationship and whether he'd seen her recently. Finally, they confronted him about his DNA found in Lisa's apartment in '98. Anthony suddenly began crying and asked for a pen and paper. Thinking he was ready to confess, they handed it over, but to their surprise, the man started hitting himself with the pen. They had to restrain him while he continued crying and shouting that they were trying to frame him for a crime he didn't commit. After that, Anthony was charged with the murder, and detectives informed Lisa's relatives that her killer had finally been caught. However, they had to wait another 4 years before the trial began in court. Anthony initially appeared confident, even arrogant, and smirked. But as the proceedings continued, he began showing up with a Bible in hand and a cross around his neck, which the detectives saw as an attempt to sway the jurors. His lawyer insisted Anthony couldn't physically have committed the murder. He had been diagnosed with a condition 5 years prior that weakened his muscles, making repetitive movements extremely difficult. The lawyer argued that Anthony wouldn't have been able to inflict over 20 stab wounds on the victim. But medical reports from the year of the murder showed that Anthony's condition was under control and treatment was effective. Moreover, the prosecution had much stronger evidence pointing directly to his presence in the victim's apartment. His skin was found under Lisa's nails, his blood on a pillowcase, and his fingerprint on the toilet seat. But despite all this, Anthony continued to insist he hadn't seen Lisa since the late 80s. The prosecution theorized that Anthony contacted Lisa and went to her home, where he attempted to engage in intimacy with her, but she refused. In a fit of rage, he then killed her, cut off a portion of her hair, and took it with him before fleeing the scene. In the end, the jury unanimously found him guilty of first-degree murder. However, there was a problem with convicting him of sexual assault. The prosecution believed Anthony had indeed assaulted the victim, but due to the extent of decomposition, there was no direct evidence to confirm it. The situation was further complicated when, before sentencing, Anthony challenged the assault charges, arguing that the 13-year delay in bringing charges violated his constitutional rights. As a result, the primary charges were reduced from first-degree murder to second-degree murder, resulting in a less severe punishment. Anthony eventually received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after just 16 years in 2031, when he would be 72. Since then, Anthony has been serving his sentence in prison and continues to maintain his innocence. Lisa's relatives hope that his parole request will be denied, which is quite likely, as often, a refusal to admit guilt is seen by the parole board as a lack of remorse, meaning the offender doesn't deserve to be released. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Justine Valdez. Justine Valdez was born in 1993 in Aritao, a town situated 255 kilometers north of the Filipino capital Manila. She was the only child of Teresita and Danilo Valdez, also known as Tess and Danny. Justine attended St. Teresita's Academy, a Catholic secondary school in her hometown of Aritao. While Teresita and Danilo had moved to Ireland for work, Justine remained in the Philippines with family. In 2015, her parents were able to bring Justine to Ireland, and the family settled in the small village of Enniskerry in County Wicklow, near the Dublin-Wicklow border. After arriving in Ireland, Justine immediately began working, studying, and building a life for herself. She was extremely close to both of her parents and maintained constant contact with them when she wasn't at home. Justine was studying accountancy at IT Tallaght and worked 2 part-time jobs as a care worker and as a waitress in a cafe in the bustling coastal town of Bray. In November 2017, Justine began a relationship with Joseph Squire. Joseph later described Justine as being happy and active, saying she never got up to any mischief. She was way too innocent for that. He added that she was literally the most innocent person I ever met in my life, and I will never forget her. On May 19, 2018, 24-year-old Justine Valdez spent her afternoon with a routine she was familiar with. After completing paperwork for her residency permit, she went to the gym for a workout, wrapping up around 4:20 p.m. Justine then planned to head home, and her mother, Terrace, sent her a quick text asking her to pick up some bread on the way. Justine obliged, making a stop at the store before catching the 185 bus bound for Bray, departing after 6 p.m. The bus dropped her off at the village of Enniskerry, a familiar stop near her rural home. From there, a 15 to 20-minute walk typically separated her from her doorstep. This journey, though not arduous for a young and active woman like Justine, became fraught with worry when she failed to return home. Terrace, accustomed to Justine's punctuality and communication, grew increasingly anxious as time passed without word from her daughter. Calls and messages went unanswered, prompting Terrace to venture out in search of Justine. She scoured the streets, stopping strangers to inquire about her daughter's distinct Asian features and sporty attire, which stood out in the crowd. Despite sightings of Justine disembarking the bus, her whereabouts remained a mystery. Terrace's frantic search yielded no answers, leaving her with mounting fear and uncertainty about where Justine had gone and what could have befallen her on her seemingly routine journey home. With each passing moment, Terrace's worry deepened, driving her to scour the streets for her daughter and any potential witnesses. Justine's disappearance left her mother in a state of distress, unable to find any trace of her daughter. In desperation, she reached out to the police to report the situation. Detectives promptly took her statement and initiated a search for Justine. At 5:20 p.m., Justine, still wearing her gym clothes, took the 185 bus from Bray to Enniskerry village, arriving at approximately 6 p.m. From there, she had a 15 to 20-minute walk until she reached home. It was a journey she would never have a chance to complete. Despite their humble beginnings, Justine's parents worked tirelessly to support her education and livelihood. Justine's parents worked as a gardener and housekeeper, respectively. Justine herself was known for her reliability, hard work, and dedication to her obligations. Given her strong ties to her family and her commitment to her responsibilities, no one believed she would willingly abandon her loved ones. Furthermore, her limited social circle and absence of typical teenage rebellious behavior made the idea of her running away seem implausible. Despite contacting all of Justine's acquaintances, none could provide insight into her whereabouts. At 24, Justine had outgrown any inclination for teenage defiance, remaining a steadfast and devoted member of her family until her sudden disappearance. Hence, the possibility of Justine running away was swiftly dismissed. She maintained an unwavering connection with her parents, updating them on her every move. On the particular day, she and her mother exchanged a staggering 63 messages, the last being at 6:24 p.m. when Justine alighted from the bus. As detectives diligently investigated leads to determine Justine's whereabouts, a crucial tip emerged from her co-workers. Shortly after Justine's bus stop, authorities were notified of a disturbing incident. A female motorist reported witnessing a man forcibly pushing an Asian woman with dark hair, dressed in sportswear similar to Justine's, into the trunk of a black Nissan Qashqai. The woman recounted her harrowing experience, driving past the suspicious scene with her 12-year-old son and promptly alerting the police. Shortly after, another motorist passed by and witnessed a similarly distressing scene. This time, an Asian girl was seen seated in the back of the vehicle, tapping on the window in evident fear. Initially perplexed, the driver later discussed the incident with his wife. Upon returning home and realizing the gravity of the situation, he promptly contacted the authorities at 7:20 p.m. to report the suspected kidnapping. Another concerned driver also contacted the police, citing a suspicious Nissan vehicle driving erratically approximately 6 kilometers from Enniskerry. Patrol officers swiftly responded to the location provided by the initial female caller. There they discovered Justine's broken cell phone and a bag of bread abandoned on the roadside, raising alarming concerns for her safety. Armed with this disturbing evidence, investigators concluded that the kidnapper had targeted Justine as she made her way home from the bus stop. After initial attempts to conceal her in the trunk were thwarted by Justine's resistance, the suspect forced her into the back seat before driving off to an unknown destination. The suspect's black Nissan was promptly added to the wanted list, prompting an extensive search effort involving patrol cars and helicopters. However, the night made the search more difficult, resulting in no result. When day broke, the search resumed, with detectives revisiting eyewitness testimonies and narrowing down potential suspects. One individual, 40-year-old Mark Hennessy, emerged as a person of interest due to his resemblance to the kidnapper's description. Police officers visited his residence, only to find his wife Nicola unaware of his whereabouts since he left for a drink after work the previous day. This information only raised more suspicions surrounding Mark, prompting investigators to delve further into his background. Mark Hennessy appeared to be a pillar of the community, widely regarded as a devoted family man, husband, and father to 2 young daughters, the youngest born just 8 months prior. Hailing from a respected family, he resided in an affluent neighborhood alongside other young families. Mark's occupation as an estimator on construction sites provided a stable income for his family, and he boasted a clean record with no prior brushes with the law. Despite his seemingly impeccable reputation, law enforcement remained cognizant of the unsettling reality that individuals may conceal darker motives beneath a veneer of respectability. With this in mind, the police officers visited the bar that Mark had frequented the previous night to gather more information. The staff confirmed his presence, but noted that his stay was brief. He had left after consuming a single beer and watching some soccer. Unimpressed by the excitement of the match, Mark's return to the bar around midnight appeared to be marked by visible agitation and unease. Upon reviewing the bar's CCTV footage, investigators corroborated the staff's accounts, observing that Mark's stay was approximately 10 minutes before he departed at around 5:40 p.m. Engrossed in a phone conversation, he quickly made his way to his car and drove off, concluding his visit around 11:30 p.m. Interestingly, upon leaving the bar, Mark actually returned and engaged in a conversation with an acquaintance at the doorway before leaving once again. Detectives found themselves puzzled by Mark's whereabouts between 5:40 p.m. and 11 p.m., and the nature of his activities during this time remained a mystery. By this point, investigators had acquired CCTV footage from the bus route Justine had taken, and upon examination, a disturbing revelation emerged. Mark's black Nissan had trailed the bus just 30 minutes after he left the bar, shadowing its movements throughout the day. This revelation heightened suspicions surrounding his involvement, especially in relation to Justine's disappearance. The search for Mark's car and the missing girl persisted unabated, with growing certainty that the 2 incidents were intertwined. Mark emerged as a prime suspect in Justine's abduction. Despite efforts to track his cell phone, which intermittently powered on and off, Mark managed to evade detection. He made a solitary call to his wife, informing her of his continued absence. Even when confronted by his own family, who pleaded with him to surrender to the authorities, Mark remained obstinate and promptly departed. Mark's parents relayed this encounter to investigators, prompting renewed efforts to locate him. However, Mark remained elusive, staying a step ahead of law enforcement. In a bid for public assistance, the police issued appeals through the media, urging anyone with knowledge of Justine, Mark, or his car's whereabouts to come forward. One listener heeded this call, spotting a similar Nissan Qashqai on the road with a familiar-looking driver behind the wheel. Sensing an opportunity, she followed the vehicle to Cherrywood Park, where she observed the driver closely before promptly notifying the authorities. Upon arrival, the responding police officers encountered a man seated behind the wheel, his body covered in blood. Despite their attempts to coax him out of the vehicle, Mark remained obstinate, brandishing a knife in a menacing manner. Faced with imminent danger, the officers were compelled to resort to the use of firearms, resulting in a bullet striking Mark in the shoulder. Removing him from the car, they discovered him conscious, though uncooperative. As they commenced their examination of the vehicle, their hopes of locating the missing girl were dashed, as Justine was nowhere to be found. Persistent questioning yielded no answers from Mark, who maintained a steadfast silence. Medical personnel promptly attended to him, and he was swiftly transported to the hospital, where doctors battled to save his life, clinging to the hope that he might divulge Justine's whereabouts. Tragically, it was revealed that the bullet had tragically ricocheted, fatally striking Mark in the head. Subsequent investigations unearthed the grim truth. The blood adorning his face and body belonged to him, and he bore several fresh stab wounds on his arm and neck. Law enforcement speculated that, consumed by fear of exposure, Mark had chosen to confront his fate with the knife, conveniently stashed in his vehicle. When the police finally apprehended him, there was a sense of disappointment pervading the air. Despite successfully locating the suspect and his vehicle, their primary objective of finding the missing person remained unfulfilled. However, a note was discovered, its contents obscured by bloodstains. Through the haze of crimson, officers managed to discern the words "sorry" and "Puck's Castle," hinting at a potential lead to Justine's whereabouts. Though hope flickered dimly, they persevered in their search, while the anxious parents fervently prayed for their daughter's safe return. A meticulous search unfolded in a wooded expanse south of Dublin, guided by the cryptic clue near the castle. Initially, Justine's purse containing her identification documents was unearthed. Then, on May 21st, a grim discovery was made: the lifeless body of Justine Valdez. Autopsy revealed the horrific truth that she had been murdered on the very evening of her abduction, succumbing to manual strangulation. Tragically, evidence of sexual assault further compounded the brutality of her demise. However, amidst the sorrow and despair, another unsettling revelation emerged. Toxicological analysis unveiled the presence of prohibited substances in Justine's body. This posed a puzzling enigma, as there was no clear explanation for the origin or purpose of these substances. Conversely, the analysis found that Mark had ingested a significant quantity of these substances, further deepening the mystery surrounding the tragic events. It emerged that Mark had recently spiraled into alcohol and substance abuse, likely contributing to the presence of these substances in Justine's system. Concurrently, his domestic life had deteriorated, with frequent spats between him and his spouse over his substance abuse and mounting debts. Investigations revealed Mark's engagement with the dating app Tinder, where he actively pursued interactions with various women, including flirting with female patrons at bars. Further incriminating evidence emerged when Mark's DNA was found on the victim's body, reinforcing the police's suspicions about his involvement in Justine's abduction and subsequent murder. Detectives pieced together a disturbing narrative. The murder was driven by sexual motives, and Justine became an unwitting victim in Mark's sinister pursuit of prey. Spotting her while following a bus, he seized the opportunity in broad daylight, brazenly abducting her from the street without hesitation, even in the presence of multiple witnesses. A thorough examination of the victim's and perpetrator's phones revealed no prior acquaintance or communication between them. Their paths had never crossed before, with no mutual connections to bridge the gap between victim and assailant. This grim revelation underscored the tragic randomness of Justine's fate and the calculated brutality of Mark's actions. Upon closer scrutiny, the detective's initial assessment underwent a significant shift. It transpired that Mark was intimately familiar with the route Justine frequently traversed, suggesting a premeditated nature to her murder. Far from a spur-of-the-moment act, Mark had been meticulously observing her movements, biding his time until he deemed it opportune to strike. The day of the abduction marked a deliberate departure from his usual routine, as he purposefully positioned himself at the bus stop, tailing Justine's every move until he pounced on her unsuspecting victim. The revelation sent shockwaves through the local community, unaccustomed to such heinous acts in their otherwise tranquil neighborhood. Many rallied around the grieving family, offering solace and support during their time of immense loss. At the farewell ceremony, poignant tributes were paid as white balloons soared into the sky, symbolizing hope amidst despair. Some attendees donned pink t-shirts emblazoned with Justine's likeness, a touching homage to her memory. Ultimately, Justine's family chose to lay her to rest in her native Philippines, seeking solace in familiar surroundings. Though they initially remained abroad for a period, they eventually returned to Ireland in 2021, seeking a fresh start and new opportunities. Relocating to a different city and pursuing new occupations offered a chance to heal from the harrowing memories that haunted them in their former home. Mark Hennessy exhibited the characteristic behavior of a serial sex offender. They concluded that although his crime seemed spontaneous and unplanned, he displayed the traits of someone who had committed such acts multiple times previously. In the early days of the investigation, it emerged that a man matching Hennessy's age and physical description had been harassing female passengers at train stations in South County, Dublin, over several years, including exposing himself to them. However, there is no definitive proof that Hennessy and the serial harasser were the same person. We will likely never know, as Mark Hennessy's secrets died with him. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Alison Baden Clay. Alison Baden was born on July 1, 1968 in a Brisbane suburb. Raised in an affluent family, she developed a passion for ballet early on. After school, she pursued higher education, excelling academically and mastering 6 languages. At 25 in 1993, Alison won a local beauty pageant, showcasing her ballet skills. Following university, she secured a position in the HR department at Brisbane's Flight Centre, where her career quickly advanced, recognized by her boss as a bright and promising talent. It was here that Alison met Gerard, who would later become her husband. Gerard Baden Clay was born on September 9, 1970, in Bournemouth, UK. He came from a notable lineage, with his great-grandfather, Robert Baden Powell, being a famed British military leader and founder of the Scouting movement. Gerard was just a year old when his family moved to Zambia, his father Nigel Clay's homeland. After 8 years in Zambia, they immigrated to Australia. Gerard completed his education in Australia and pursued a degree in accounting. He eventually joined the Flight Centre for work, where he met Alison's. It was at the Flight Centre where Gerard encountered Alison, leading to a blossoming relationship. Gerard and Alison Baden Clay exchanged vows on August 23, 1997. Following their nuptials, they embarked on a global tour, including stops in South America, Switzerland, and a stint in London. Once back in Australia, Alison resumed her career at the Flight Centre, eventually rising to a management position. In 2002, she became pregnant and later gave birth to their first child, Hannah. After Hannah's birth, Alison chose to dedicate herself entirely to family life. During this period, Gerard explored various occupations and established a premium real estate agency in Brisbane in 2004, with his parents' involvement in the business. Known for his lively and self-assured demeanor, Gerard dedicated substantial time and effort to his work. The family grew with the birth of their second daughter, Sarah, in 2004, and their youngest, Ella, in 2006. They lived in a verdant home situated in the suburban area of Brookfield, Brisbane. Alison, primarily a homemaker, was deeply engaged in caring for her daughters. Over time, Alison noticed that Gerard was becoming increasingly distant and aloof. This reached a climax when he made the shocking admission that he no longer loved her. Gerard's behavior towards Allison changed, with him frequently criticizing her. He would berate her for making unappealing meals or for not keeping their home clean, sometimes labeling Allison as lazy and expressing that she no longer appealed to him romantically. In the face of these remarks, Allison chose to remain quiet, enduring the harshness of his words. She maintained a personal diary where she documented her enduring love for Gerard, the recurring disputes at home, her own feelings of guilt, and her determination to correct her perceived faults in hopes of rekindling his affection. Despite the turmoil within her family life, Allison managed to mask her inner struggles with an outward appearance of cheerfulness. She was consistently seen as a warm, benevolent individual, a devoted mother, and a loving spouse. In 2011, after the devastating floods in Queensland, Gerard's business faced financial difficulties, accumulating debts of approximately $1 million Australian dollars. That October, Allison discovered that Gerard was engaged in a secret affair with Tony McHugh, a colleague at his agency. Gerard and Tony had first crossed paths in 2008 when she was a client, and later, he hired her. At that time, Tony, a 17-year marriage veteran with children, was experiencing marital troubles. The affair with Gerard quickly escalated, culminating in her divorce. Tony was aware of Gerard's marital status. He had portrayed his relationship with Allison as platonic, claiming their marriage lacked intimacy and that he remained with Allison solely for their daughters. Gerard assured Tony of a future together, including marriage. However, after nearly 4 years, Gerard had still not initiated divorce proceedings when Allison discovered the affair in October 2011. Gerard informed Tony that they had to end their relationship. He terminated the affair, dismissed Tony from his real estate business, and reconciled with his wife without Tony, who held on to the hope of a future together. 4 months later, Tony and Gerard were conversing over the phone while she drove home. They talked about an upcoming real estate conference scheduled for the next day. Unexpectedly, Gerard mentioned that Tony would encounter Allison there. Upset by this foreseen development, Tony questioned Gerard's delay in telling her and accused him of habitual dishonesty in response to her frustration and doubts about their future. Gerard apologized, reaffirmed his love, and reiterated his commitment to divorcing within 3 months. He emphasized his intention to leave Allison, mentioning her mental health struggles. The following morning, on April 20th at 7:14 a.m., a distressed Gerard contacted the police, reporting Allison's disappearance after a walk around 10 p.m. the previous night. Upon arrival at the Bowden Clay home, police observed deep curved scratches on Gerard's face, which he attributed to a shaving accident. During a further examination for photographs, police noticed small red marks on his chest, which Gerard explained as bites from a caterpillar encountered while changing an outdoor light. The house inspection revealed no overt signs of disturbance. It was orderly with the bed neatly made. Gerard was composed, getting his daughters ready for school and daycare. Police interviewed Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, who recalled falling asleep to their mother's lullabies and hadn't seen her since she turned off the light. The girls, tearful during questioning, described their parents as generally happy and good to each other. The police initiated a search in the vicinity and interviewed neighbors for any leads on Allison's whereabouts, but no one reported seeing or hearing anything out of the ordinary. The only clues discovered that day were a small blood stain in Allison's car and a strand of her hair in the trunk. A larger-scale search operation was soon underway, with rescue teams and volunteers scouring the nearby woods, wells, shafts, and dams close to the Bowden Clay residence. A mannequin was placed, dressed similarly to Allison's last known attire, to aid in the search efforts. As time progressed, the likelihood of finding Allison alive diminished. Her friends clung to hope, unwilling to consider the worst. Gerard, visibly distraught, tearfully spoke to the media, yearning for his wife's return. Concurrently, he advised his mistress, Tony, to halt their communication and keep a low profile, promising that they would eventually be together. A decade after Allison vanished, on April 30th, 2012, a boater found a decomposed body by the Colo Creek riverbank, around 8 miles from the Bowden Clay home. The next day, Gerard reached out to the insurance company to discuss claiming his wife's life insurance, valued at $800,000 Australian dollars. Shortly after, the body discovered under the bridge was confirmed as the 43-year-old Allison Bowden Clay by a medical examiner. The advanced decomposition made determining the exact cause of death challenging. Dental records confirmed Allison's identity, and she was dressed in the same outfit as when she disappeared. Forensic indications pointed to possible strangulation, leading to the classification of her death as a homicide. On May 11, 2012, St. Paul's Church hosted Allison Bowden Clay's funeral. Gerard, visibly distraught, shed tears throughout the service, consoling his daughters and extending solace to Allison's parents. The ceremony saw a large turnout with hundreds in attendance. Concurrently, Gerard maintained discreet contact with his mistress, Toni, using public phones for communication. He apprised her of the tragic circumstances surrounding his wife's death and implored Toni to keep their clandestine relationship hidden from police inquiries. Gerard maintained his claim that Allison had gone for a walk around 10 p.m. and was gone by the time he woke up. However, contradictory evidence emerged. Detectives found that Gerard had charged his phone at 2 a.m. and was on his computer at 5 a.m., searching for information about the right to remain silent. Forensic analysis contradicted his claim of shaving cuts, suggesting the marks on his cheek resembled fingernail scratches. Additionally, no blood was detected on his razor. A biologist challenged Gerard's explanation of caterpillar bites on his chest, noting the absence of such caterpillars in the family's area that could have caused such marks. A botanical specialist concluded that the marks were not consistent with caterpillar bites. When Allison's body was discovered, her hair contained 5 distinct leaf types: eucalyptus, Chinese elm, crepe myrtle, cat's claw vine, and fishbone fern. Notably, 2 of these varieties, eucalyptus and Chinese elm, grew directly under the bridge where her body was found. Significantly, all 5 types of leaves and thorns were present in the backyard of the Bowden Clay family residence a month after Allison's funeral on June 13, 2012. 41-year-old Gerard Bowden Clay was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. Asserting his innocence, he vowed to fight the charges and sought bail, which was promptly denied due to concerns he might flee during questioning. Investigators contacted Toni, who disclosed the truth about their 4-year clandestine relationship. Notably, just days before Allison's disappearance, Gerard had sent Toni a letter promising that he would be with her by July 1st. The prosecution alleged that Gerard Bowden Clay murdered Allison to claim an insurance payout, clear his debts, and start anew with Toni McHugh. They theorized that on the night of April 19, 2012, after putting their daughters to bed, Allison joined Gerard to watch TV. An intense argument is believed to have erupted, during which Allison scratched Gerard's cheek. DNA traces were found under Allison's nails, but their origin was undetermined due to degradation. The prosecution suggested that Gerard strangled Allison, dragged her body through the backyard, entangling her hair with leaves, then transported her in her car's trunk to the river, disposing of her body under a bridge. They believe Gerard expected the river to wash the body away, concealing his crime. He reportedly returned home, charged his phone, cleaned the house, and reported Allison missing the next morning. After the discovery of the body, he sought legal counsel for criminal defense and visited the lawyer's office. At the June 2014 murder trial of Allison Bowden Clay, the prosecution adamantly argued for Gerard's guilt. Gerard, however, steadfastly denied any involvement. In court, he admitted to a dispute with Allison, suggesting she might have left home late at night and, in her depressive state, possibly chosen to end her life. This theory was staunchly rejected by Allison's family and friends, who were convinced of her unwavering commitment to her daughters, believing she would never abandon them. Her friends voiced long-standing disapproval of Gerard, describing him as arrogant, disingenuous, and conceited, and believed Allison's deep love for him blinded her to these negative traits. At the trial, excerpts from Allison Bowden Clay's diary were presented, revealing her sense of isolation and control by Gerard, especially after their first child's birth. She felt lonely, confined to the home, and detailed Gerard's controlling behavior, including insulting her, tracking her conversations through a baby monitor, managing her finances, erasing relatives' contacts from her phone, and blocking their calls. Following Allison's demise, Gerard's attempt to claim the insurance payout was rejected, with the funds being withheld pending the trial's conclusion. Another key testimony came from Melissa Romano, who had never met Gerard in person, but spoke with him on the phone in 2009 regarding a real estate deal. She testified that after finalizing the deal, Gerard made a startling call to her, proposing, "I'm looking for someone to kill my wife." Romano, taken aback, questioned his motive, but Gerard abruptly shifted the conversation and ended the call, leaving the statement unresolved. Gerard Baden Clay was convicted on July 15, 2014, and sentenced to life in prison, eligible for parole after 15 years. In 2015, he challenged his sentence, leading to a court ruling that the murder was unintentional and thus reducing his prison term. This verdict, however, triggered a massive public outcry, culminating in protests with about 4,000 participants standing in solidarity with Allison's family. Responding to the public sentiment, in 2016, the High Court of Australia overturned the appellate court's decision, reinstating the original murder conviction. Consequently, Gerard Baden Clay's parole eligibility has been deferred until at least 2027, while incarcerated. Initially, Gerard conducted himself as an exemplary inmate, but as time progressed, he adapted to prison life and became less restrained in his behavior, leading to an incident where he inappropriately touched a prison guard, resulting in a stern reprimand during his imprisonment. Gerard Baden Clay also established a friendship with a 73-year-old businessman and millionaire, John Chardin, who was imprisoned for the manslaughter of his wife. Additionally, he developed a rapport with Mayan Carouse, a convict serving time for the triple homicide of his girlfriend and her two siblings. Following the trial of Gerard Baden Clay, his former mistress, Toni McHugh, moved to Bali, where she engaged in teaching and charity work. 4 years later, she relocated to the United Arab Emirates to continue her career in education. McHugh now leads a modest lifestyle and keeps her personal details under wraps. She occasionally connects with friends via social media using an anonymous account, cautious of Baden Clay potentially locating her post-release. In her most recent media interaction, McHugh expressed remorse about the situation and clarified that she never intended harm to Allison. She also disclosed that Baden Clay and Clay had been unfaithful to Allison with not only her but other women as well, including Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, the daughters of Gerard and Allison Baden Clay. The children, Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, are being cared for by their maternal grandparents, Allison's parents. The entirety of Allison's estate, including any insurance money, was entrusted to her children in 2022. The eldest daughter, Hannah Baden Clay, has completed her university education and has pursued a career in dancing, following in her mother's footsteps to honor Allison's memory. To address the critical issue of domestic violence, Allison's sister, Vanessa, founded a charitable organization dedicated to combating domestic abuse, raising awareness, and providing support to those impacted by such situations. Through this case, being able to recognize the signs of domestic and family violence is a crucial first step towards prevention. In Allison's case, there were numerous indicators, some more conspicuous than others. These signs included, but were not limited to, a sense of isolation from friends, family, and support systems, a significant degree of control over financial resources, and a gradual erosion of self-confidence and self-worth. Identifying these things early on is essential in order to address the underlying issues and provide the necessary support and resources to those affected by domestic and family violence. By being vigilant and attuned to the subtle and overt manifestations of this complex issue, we can take proactive measures to foster safer and more supportive environments for individuals and families.